sweet dreams are made of this.
This has been ongoing for months, and is freaking me out. Over the months, strange stuff has started happening while I'm trying to sleep. Every night, my bed will randomly shift, and my foot will feel like it's being crushed, as if something decided to take a seat on my bed and just watch me. I've heard whispers and sniffing as if the entity has a pet dog. I always feel like I'm being watched. My room is in the basement, and in this house, in the basement, the only thing that ever makes sound in the middle of the night are the pipes and the vents. There should be no reason for the washer changing setting, which can only be done by dials, or something smacking the water heater loud enough for me to hear a clear ting, or even random stuff falling over and off shelves. I've lived in this room for 2 years now, and this only started 9 months or so ago. But the worst part happened yesterday. I suffer from paranoia, so these past months I just chalked it up to me being paranoid. Until yesterday, at 10 a.m, I got out of bed, got dressed, and after I went up the stairs to get breakfast, I had a clear adult voice from a few feet away say, "Yay, he's awake." It couldn't have been my mum because she was at her business, and she's the only woman living in our house. No, I wasn't hallucinating. I never have before, and I was wide awake by the time I left my room. Just like always. My family thinks I'm crazy, and haven't heard or seen anything. Clearly she likes me. Why else would she be excited about me being awake? So she's not really a threat. At the moment at least. But it's still creepy. How do I get it to stop? It's freaking me out. I'm fine if she stays, so long as I get her to stop being so creepy. My friend told me I should talk to her. This is terrifying. What if I say something that makes her mad? I share a room with power tools and saws and stuff. She's most active at night. That one time at 10 a.m. was the only time she's done anything when it was bright out. Any help would be appreciated. I was a dumb kid. I did a lot of ridiculous shit, but this encounter, just let me tell you, I learned my lesson about breaking into places that really should be left alone. It was in the middle of the summer. Me and my friends sat on a wooden fence smoking cigarettes, thinking about what the hell to do with ourselves. One of my friends suggested an abandoned hospital up the road from my house. We were unsure at first as we'd heard a lot of stories from people who had previously went years ago, before it was boarded up again. After much discussion we went. It was boarded up with wood nailed to the windows. The doors were sealed shut, so there was no way we could have gotten in that way. We were going to walk away and just go home, but luckily I remembered I had something at home that I could get the boards off with. As we climbed through the window, we finally got in. It was like going through a time warp. The place wasn't heavily damaged and the interior looked like it was from the 70s or 60s. There was still stale bloody towels there too. It was eerie as hell. Anyways, we fooled around and freaked each other out for a few hours until we had to go. Before we left, we messed around with the fire extinguisher that had been left there. While everyone was in the center of the hospital, I stepped out for a breather in a hallway with the window we entered through. I was at the bottom of the hallway and I saw a pale, slender figure in a blue hospital gown climb out the window while looking at me. He looked tired and sick. I froze and screamed. I left as soon as it appeared. I will never forget how freaky it was. Last December, I fled an abusive relationship and crashed with my friend Amy. She lives in an upper-level duplex that is quite small, and I stayed there for a while with my cat and dog, which was a lot, as she has a dog also. Next door to the duplex is a cute, old 4-bedroom house that is owned by Mark, a friend of Amy's who lives abroad. The couple who was renting out Mark's place bought a house and moved out. They suggested to me that it would be a great place for me to stay while I continued my apartment search. I was absolutely elated and agreed immediately. Mine and Amy's dog could play every day, and we could still see each other all the time. I was excited at the opportunity and paid Mark some rent, but mostly he just wanted to help me out with my situation and someone to house sit until he came home in May. I live in a very cold, snowy climate, so looking for a place in May is exponentially easier. Amy informed me that the house had quirks and a creepy basement, and told me if I ever felt creeped out in there all alone, I could come back whenever. She lived in that house for a couple of years, so I took her word for it. When one of the tenants showed me the place for the first time, I definitely felt something very off. I chalked it up to the weird layout, the draft and the lack of sunlight in the rear of the house. Upstairs was 2 bedrooms and a bathroom in the middle. The front bedroom was warm and sunny, and the rest of the upstairs was very cold, noticeably colder than the rest of the house. Upon entering the back upstairs bedroom, it felt like a downward shift, like the energy in that room felt so strange, and I felt like I wasn't wanted in there, so I barely looked around and just closed the door behind me. The first couple of weeks, nothing much happened, but I never felt at ease. I felt like I was being watched. I wrote it off as being easily spooked in a large house, and it was my first time living alone. I started having trouble sleeping, despite my room, the upstairs front bedroom, being the only place in the house I felt at ease. One night I decided to smoke some weed and watch a movie in the living room, kinda late at night. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up to what I swore was someone running up the stairs and then slamming the back bedroom door. My dog looked startled too, and ran upstairs and started growling at the closed door. No one was in there. I decided to lay off the weed, but some nights after that, I heard footsteps pacing in the back room. The next thing that started happening was while I was in the bathtub in the upstairs bathroom. My dog would lay in the doorway and just stare at my back room. Sometimes he would growl or bark at it. I would also come home to find the door open when I definitely shut it, or I would hear my cat meowing to be let into the room. On a couple of occasions I found my cat shut in the room. Also around this time my bath towel went missing, and I looked absolutely everywhere for it. It began to take a toll on me. I started having nightmares every night, and I would wake up almost every night to my dog whining between 3 and 4 in the morning. I felt like I was being watched, and the house felt so heavy. I told Amy about all this, and she confessed to me that she had some weird experiences in the house when she lived there as well. Her bedroom was the back room, and a couple of times she woke up in a semi-dream state to a man at the end of her bed and began talking to it. She then woke up for real and saw texts from her roommate asking who she was talking to. She also would see things moving out of the corner of her eye, hear footsteps, and feel like she was being watched. She told me of an instance of seeing footsteps in the snow going from the back door to the middle of the lawn and disappearing. One day, I was in the living room hearing footsteps and just felt so overwhelmed by the presence, I was crying and decided to have a go talking to it. I said, "Hey, I know this is your house too. I'm leaving in a month. I've been through so much pain these past few months. Please, just leave me alone. Please let me know you've heard me." Then the door upstairs slammed, and that was the last I heard for a while. My nightmares stopped. I started sleeping through the night and felt less of the presence. One night I was hanging out with Amy in her backyard with our dogs and her downstairs neighbour, Sam, to celebrate me finding an apartment. I went back into my house for some more beers and to grab a sweater. I went to run up the stairs, and standing there at the top was an opaque black silhouette. I couldn't make out any features, but it was as real as a person standing there. I screamed and ran back down and turned on the stairway light, only to find no one there and the back room open again. Finally, my move-out date had arrived, and I felt so relieved to feel absolutely nothing in my new apartment. I went back to the house one last time to check to see if I forgot anything, and there, right in the middle of the floor of the back room, was my bath towel, still slightly damp, as if I had just used it. Funny prank, ghost. I have not been back since. Back in 2014-15, I was in high school and living with my parents. My parents were heavy on Christianity growing up, so I was raised going to church 2 times a week. My mum is extremely spiritual as well. Anyways, for years my mum kept telling everyone that there was a lot of spiritual warfare that was going on in our house. Everyone in my family thought she was just crazy, but I strongly believe it was true. My sisters started going down the wrong path. My dad was apparently cheating on my mum for years, etc. My parents started noticing some weird type of feces in our basement window wells. So one night my mum asked me to help her find out what it was by going into the basement with the lights off and only using a flashlight. We went down there and were quietly waiting to see if we could figure out what it was, when all of a sudden we heard a whisper that was so loud it almost felt like it was coming from a surround sound speaker. It was almost as if somebody came right up into both of our ears and whispered. It immediately sent chills down my whole body as well as my mum's. We both froze for a second, and my mum said, "What was that? Was that you?" And I said, "No, what was that?" We both bolted up the stairs screaming. We refused to go back down that night, and my dad tried to say we were just crazy and hearing things. I've never felt so uncomfortable and violated in my entire life. Something definitely whispered into our ears, but we couldn't figure out what it had said. Still to this day, thinking about it freaks me out. Since then, my parents divorced and sold the house. Growing up, I had experienced a few strange things in that house, as did my sisters as well. Sometimes, we would hear what almost sounded like a phone vibrating in the basement, but we couldn't ever figure out where it was coming from. It happened multiple times in a span of 5 years. I truly believe there was a demonic entity messing with my family. What are your thoughts or input on what this could have possibly been? Since the pandemic, the church my parents and family attend has been recording Sunday morning worship and message earlier in the week, and then the minister will edit and publish them on social media and the website Sunday morning. This past Wednesday we recorded the worship music. I'm one of the 3 singers we have, and my mum is the pianist. While in the middle of recording our first song, we all hear a man yell,
Stop!
I look over in the direction it came from, somewhere off the stage to my left, and we finish the song. After we finish the song, one of the other singers goes, "Did you hear that?" And all 5 of us, including our other instrumentalist, my mum and the 3 singers, are like, "Yeah." The saxophone player was suggesting that it was a wrong note he played, or a squeak or something, but none of us were really convinced. Flash forward to this Sunday, and my mum and I watched the service, and we noticed that the noise couldn't have been from the sax because the sax has a microphone and would have been very audible on the video. My mum and I noticed where the two of us looked over at the noise and replayed the section a couple of times loudly, and we could hear it, just barely under the music. By far the freakiest thing I've experienced in that church, and none of us will ever be finding ourselves alone in that building again. But there's no way that noise was made from anyone on stage, or the minister off stage. My boyfriend works with bricks. I'm unsure of the English word. And his crew went to a castle in our town to renovate some of the brick walls. He loves history, so for him, this was like a dream gig. He and one of his co-workers went down to the basement that's otherwise off limits to the public to do some renovating there as well. I'm assuming they replace old, broken bricks with new ones. It's basically a long hallway with a bunch of rooms, each with a door. It was built 500 years ago. While they were doing their work, all of the doors suddenly slammed, with only a few seconds in between them. He says that no human could have possibly ran that fast, and there were no footsteps. They both freaked out and hurried out of the basement, up to the rest of the crew who looked at them cluelessly. Well, we were both taking a stroll around 7 PM the other night, and him being the history freak, he wanted to walk through the castle. You can walk through the gates. There's a short path which then leads out to a huge garden. I was very reluctant, having experienced weird, unexplained knocks on the ceiling in my aunt's house the weekend before that. He dragged me along anyway and told me historical facts about the castle and so on. Nothing really happened while we were walking through the gate and on the path, but when we got out to the garden, I felt even more scared than before. There's water around the castle, but in the middle of the water there's a small little square of green land. My boyfriend explained that one of the kings would put his wife on that land whenever she got upset, and wouldn't bring her back until she had cooled off. I kind of snorted at that, looked at the land, and then glanced up at the castle again. In the window, aligning with the square piece of land, stood a completely white figure. There wasn't anyone in any of the windows before, which is probably why my view shifted to that specific window. I'm almost certain it was a woman, since her figure had a thin waist. I freaked out and yanked my boyfriend away, who first laughed at me, but then he glanced back himself and saw the same thing I did. I didn't tell him which window I had looked at, or even what I saw. He turned back to me, said, "Okay, I saw her," and then we both hurried through the garden and out onto the street. He said her. I'm not sure if it's the queen that he was talking about earlier, or just some other spirit. I wonder if maybe she was watching him, rather than me, considering his past experience in the basement. Also the fact that she appeared in the window, lowest to the ground. For anyone wondering, the castle I'm referring to is Frederiksborg Castle. I tried googling around about ghosts, but little to nothing came up. Ever since I was a kid, I've had a demon which followed me everywhere. I'm not sure if it's reality or just my brain playing tricks on me. I much rather prefer to think it's the latter one. It all started back in my childhood, when I was somewhere around 6 or 7 years old. We have an attic, and on nights when I used to wash my face in the sink, which is in the hallway, the demonic figure used to descend from the attic. We keep our attic door open because it's loose and it keeps on opening on its own. He's thin, unnaturally tall, humanoid with slouched back and long limbs. He is all black, with contrasting fluorescent green eyes. His smile is the most frightening thing about him. That's what scares me the most. He has very pointed teeth, just like some meat-eating animal. And he always walks like one of those possessed people in horror movies. You know, like bent from the back slightly and approaching like an animal. However, he never approached extremely close to me, just close enough to freak me out, and I used to snap my eyes open every time I was near the sink, washing my face at night. I've told my mum about it, and she agrees that it's most probably my damned imagination. And I totally agree with her, but I don't understand how my brain came to imagine such a thing. I've never seen a horror movie with such a character that my brain would take some idea from. I used to imagine him a lot in my childhood days. And then there was this period when I stopped seeing or imagining him. He was gone. I forgot about him until a few years back, when I saw or imagined him again. However, this time, the encounter was much more terrifying. I was at my uncle's house for summer holidays, and one night when I was sleeping alone, I felt his presence. It felt so real that I was almost convinced that my so-called demon actually exists. I have a habit of occupying the entire bed while sleeping, and while I was sleeping with my legs spread apart, I felt something climbing on the bed. I wanted to open my eyes and see what it was, but I couldn't dare open my eyes. I was lying, numb in fear. I thought it was someone who broke into the house, and so I pretended to be asleep. I felt the mattress dig in between my legs, as if someone was now standing between my legs and slowly proceeding upwards. I suddenly opened my eyes, and for a brief second, I saw, or again imagined, that demon standing between my legs and looking down at me. The room was completely dark, and the only source of light was the light from the AC, so I couldn't see him fully, apart from his fluorescent green eyes and that creepy smile. And just like that, he was gone. My brain keeps imagining him once in a while, like maybe once every 3 or 4 months. Sometimes I feel like something is resting their arm around my waist while I'm sleeping. It's like I feel a weight around my waist. It's just messed up. I don't know what to make of it. I would like to term it as my imagination, but recently it has started to feel real, as if the demon came into existence through my imagination. If any of you know what this situation is, please let me know. I will be grateful. I spent nearly a decade underground. The work was hard and dangerous, but could be rewarding and very well compensated. Coal mining is a way of life here. Entire families have worked the mines. I myself have several family members who have retired or work down there still. I got out, not because of these experiences, but because I believe coal mining will end soon. There are other reasons, but I don't want to identify myself. Now, I'm no superstitious backwoods hillbilly who attributed every little thing as paranormal. I have a science and engineering background. Most things have reasonable explanations for the things we see. These stories of mine, or those that were told to me, are not the case. They have no explanation. The first time I heard of anything going bump in the dark was relayed by a co-worker. I was still a red hat at the time. For those who don't know, the first 6 months to a year, depending on state law, a new miner must wear a red hard hat. They cannot leave sight or sound of the black hat they are assigned to. I was working with a guy about my age, who was a no-nonsense guy when it came to work. He was an extremely competent coal miner. We were working with a bolting machine when I looked over at the rib, the wall, and clearly written on the rib support was the word ghost. followed by the time and date, which was a few weeks prior. Curious, I asked about the writing. He gave me a sheepish look and relayed this story to me. I was working down here by myself, running the bolter. It was nearly the end of the shift and I was keeping an eye for the relief crew to arrive on section. I just happened to look across the bolter and see a man standing there looking at me. I was just about to say something when I realized that this guy was certainly not on our crew. Then I realized his cap light was emitting no light and was in fact an old carbide lamp, not our battery-powered ones. My adrenaline spiked, and all I wanted to do was run away, but I was rooted to the spot, looking at him, looking at me. He was about 5 feet away, standing behind the bolting machine, so just visible from the chest area up. So as I was about to open my mouth to speak or scream, I'm not sure, he turned 90 degrees and began walking along the side of the bolter. What is even stranger is, with every step he took, he would sink lower and lower into the ground, until his head was below the edge of the bolting machine. Picture the stairway gag, if you know what I mean. I snapped out of it and ran around the other side of the machine, to see no one there. He was gone, seemingly sank into the earth with each step. In a daze, I walked to the track and saw that the relief man trip had not arrived. It was just our crew. I wrote the time and the date on the support to help recall where and when I saw this. I returned to that spot many times, hoping to see him again. I never did.
Okay, so about 3 years ago my mum and I were living in a 1-bedroom apartment. We didn't really have any money and it was the only place we could afford. It was a super old Victorian home in Tacoma, Washington, that had been sectioned off into 4 different little apartments. Since I was a kid, I've always been super sensitive to energy. Whether it's people or a place, if there's some type of negativity, I can sense it. When we first moved in there, I felt weird. I wouldn't say that I felt anything evil there, but the place felt off. A couple of months in, I went to spend the night at my boyfriend's place, which wasn't something I did often. About 9:30 I got a call from my mum. Mind you, at the time she was 63. I picked up and could immediately tell that she was upset. She asked me if I was at my boyfriend's and if I was okay. I told her yes, I'm perfectly fine. And she then explained to me that she'd gone to lay down to go to sleep when she heard my voice yell her name. At first I doubted it, thinking she just had a bad dream. But she was sure that she hadn't even been laying down for more than a minute, still wide awake, and then it was like I was right in the doorway, yelling "Mama." We both tried to forget about it, but my mum was convinced something was there in our apartment that was trying to scare her. A week later, she'd gotten some Palo Santos to try cleansing the apartment. She again did this while I was out, but she called me, scared, begging me to come home. When I got back, she explained that she'd done the usual, starting from the front door, going throughout the living room, to the bed and bath, then the kitchen, working her way front to back. She said, as she came to walk back into the living room, where we had this little table and chairs, her chair was pulled out from the table, tilted back, balancing on its back legs. I tried reassuring her we would start looking for a new place, but it wasn't going to happen fast because of our money problems. About a month after that, I was on the couch while she was cutting vegetables for dinner. and I heard her scream. I ran into the kitchen and she said she had placed the knife down on the cutting board, turned around to the sink to grab another vegetable, and when she turned back, the knife was gone. She said she turned back to the sink and was checking the counters, but it wasn't there. So she opened up the drawer to get another knife, and when she turned back to the cutting board, it was there again. We left the next day to stay with a friend for a while. But this was the most scared I'd ever seen my mum, and I know it wasn't because she was losing it or getting old. She's still very lucid. I still believe if we stayed there, something bad would have happened to her. My friend and I had decided one summer night to go to this place called the Slaughterhouse one evening. Where I grew up, there was a lot of urban legends about this place, and the road it was on, Empire Mine Road. This road was located in the Bay Area of California, and the road was shut down after many accidents had happened, and it was deemed unsafe, although it was still open as a walkable trail. Well, we had decided to go alone. I know, 2 youngish girls at night at an abandoned place. Not the smartest idea. In the past, we had gone in a group of 4 or 5 people and always found other explorers there, so we didn't think much of it, and we felt pretty safe. I had brought a film camera with me, hoping to capture something possibly otherworldly on film to serve as evidence. I also brought my pocket knife just in case there was a need and for peace of mind, because homeless sometimes hung out there, and there were always rumors of satanic rituals, although I knew the ritual rumor was most likely BS. We started the 20-minute walk to the slaughterhouse, and this time we felt really different. About a minute or 2 into the walk, I felt heavy with dread and fear, but I didn't want to say anything and creep out my friend, or seem like I was chickening out. We made it up the final turn to a straightaway, where it sounded like we were next to a freeway, but at this point we were at least a mile off from the nearest road. The loud sounds of cars and car doors closing was supposedly the remains of all the accidents that happened along that road, but I wasn't so sure. I just figured sounds were carried with the wind from the faraway freeways and roads. We made it down the final stretch, and we hopped the fence, and we were on the property. The place was very different from the last time. It looked as if it had burned, and the buildings were blocked off by rubble, so there really wasn't much to do. I walked to buildings I had photographed at a previous visit for comparison, and began joking to my friend as I started feeling a bit more comfortable. I don't remember what I was exactly doing, but I turned my back on the building. My friend stared at me, and dead seriously was like, "Come here now." And I walked over, like, what's the matter? Apparently she had seen a dark figure with red eyes behind me. I didn't personally see it, so I don't know if that was to scare me or not. But as I stepped towards her, I saw a dark truck traveling the road we had just walked on. This was really weird because the road was gated off, and we parked in front of the gate, which meant no one could come through without moving our car. I can't stress this enough. It would have been nearly impossible for a car to get through past our car and the locked gate. The truck was dark and barely visible with no lights on it, and it didn't make any sound like the road or engine noise. This dark truck pulled up to the gate we had hopped, and we heard yelling to "Get off my property!" We couldn't see anyone in the truck, and it was barely lit up. As soon as it was there, it was gone and with no sound. Neither of us saw a gun, but we both swore he had one. I was like, let's get out before whoever or whatever comes back. I nearly ran the mile back, and I'm not someone to run. Once we hit the final stretch, I could see what looked like police lights. We told each other to just remain calm and we'd be fine. Once we got there, the police greeted us politely, and we returned the politeness, hoping to score points. They had said that they received a jumbled up call that was very odd, but what they caught was there were people on the road. They seemed to be as confused by the call as we were. My friend had said, "We were just walking the road to see the place at night and never actually hopped the fence." And thank God, they believed us. After a few insulting remarks of us being two females on a road at night, we were on our way. We stopped at a well-lit gas station to catch our breath and agreed never again. I no longer lived near this area, but after that I swore I'd never go back, certainly not at night. I still think about this night and it perplexes me every time that happened. I told myself that it was just the owner, but it just doesn't make sense how they could have gotten through our car and the gate, and the confusion the police had as well. In addition, many of the photos I took turned up as pitch black, even though I had flashlights and flash on. I had a few developed, and they looked normal, but I chalked it off to be bad film. The same thing happened with the pictures I took on my phone as well. Overall, this experience has puzzled me. I'm not really sure where else to turn. Strange things have been happening in my house for about a month and a half now. Prior to then, nothing abnormal had ever really happened. Around the time this began, my dad started renovating the basement, particularly 2 rooms we don't ever use. I've only been in them maybe 5 times in my life, and I'm 22. A few days after my dad started taking the walls out, I was home alone and taking a shower. All of a sudden, somebody started pounding on the door and trying to jiggle the handle. I assumed my younger brother was home from work early and had to use the bathroom, so I yelled for him to stop. I got no response, and the pounding and knob turning started again. I looked out and saw the handle turning, but I didn't see the shadow of any feet under the door. There's a 2-inch gap where you can see if anyone is standing outside it. After the pounding stopped for a while, I ran upstairs to my room to hide until somebody got home. I heard my dog barking furiously and decided to go downstairs with a baseball bat because at this point, I thought somebody could be in my house. I went down and found my dog barking and growling at the empty bathroom. I lured him to my room, where we stayed until everyone got home. A few days later, my dog woke me up to go outside around 6 a.m. I heard movement and voices from the kitchen, and the light was on, so I thought my mum was late for work. When I got to the kitchen, the noises stopped, and I saw all the cars in the driveway were gone, so nobody was home. The other night, I fell asleep with my TV remote next to me. I woke up in the middle of the night, in time to watch my TV turn off, and the remote was somehow on my dresser. I thought the power might have gone off, but my lights never went out. Then there was a strange loud tapping under my bed that lasted about 3 minutes. It wasn't rhythmic, and I know we don't have any rodents. I am so shaken by these experiences that I hate being in my own house. I don't know what is going on, or how to make it stop. I should note that my house is very old and there have been 2 confirmed deaths within it, one of whom was my very unfriendly great-grandfather. Is my house haunted? Or am I spiraling into insanity? Let me set the scene. I used to own a house near the mountains.
in the northern side of Colorado. This was a period of time where I had just gotten fired from my job because of COVID-related reasons and was home alone. I lived with my roommate at the time, but he went out to some club that evening, leaving me alone with my dog. I hate to even think of this, and this is the first time I've ever told anyone besides my neighbors. It was around 8 p.m. on a Friday, and I was watching Friends on the TV. While watching, I heard what sounded like boxes shuffling around in the basement. My dog immediately noticed this and brought his head up. Our basement wasn't finished and we had a window down there, which wasn't in good shape, so I just had brushed it off, thinking that the wind was making noises. After a while, the noise never stopped. I decided to grab my light and head down there with my dog. So I grabbed my light from the kitchen and opened the door to the basement. I started walking down the stairs, calling for my dog. The only odd thing was that my dog decided to not come down and was making that high-pitched whining noise dogs make when they are happy or anxious. He refused to go down in the basement and just stood at the top of the stairs. To give you more perspective on how my basement was laid out, was all of my extra stuff from my childhood, like clothes and such, was in the back right corner. So when you walk down the stairs, on the very right, that is where that stuff is. And all of my roommate's stuff is right next to mine on the left. And there was a bench with all of the previous owner's stuff that they left there. So while going down there, the sound was still very clear and was getting louder and louder the further I got in there. I saw the window open and making noises and decided to go close it. As soon as I closed it, it felt like a hand grabbed my leg. But it wasn't a normal hand. It was super hot. My legs were swooped back and I fell down. All I can remember from that point on was my dog barking extremely loud. I then woke up and found myself in the closet of my roommate's bedroom. I walked downstairs and looked at the time, and it was 3 a.m, and my roommate wasn't back yet. I literally looked at the clock, grabbed my phone, dog, and ran outside the front door. I went over to the neighbor's house, about a mile away. I ran there, barefoot. I didn't have a car at the time, by the way. When I got to the neighbors, that I barely knew, by the way, I rang the doorbell extremely fast, and around a minute later, a man opened the door and asked why I was ringing his door this late at night, and I could tell he was quite frustrated with me. I told him everything, and he said that the previous owners moved out because the husband of the house ended up hanging himself in the basement. We talked for a bit while I let my dog run around in the back. I called my roommate to not go home and come over to the neighbor's house. Around an hour later, he showed up and we all just sat there and talked about what had happened. Around 10 a.m, I headed back to my house with my roommate to find the sofa flipped, all the doors open, and the cabinets in the kitchen all open with dishes on the floor, broken. I decided to go live with my sister and sell the house around 2 months later. To this day, I'm not sure what that was, and haven't had any other experiences. By the way, something that I didn't tell was that I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I've heard that ghosts thrive off bad energy or whatever. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think it was or how to explain it. So this happened today at a church I took my grandma to. I haven't been since I was a kid and I figured it'd be nice to go again. At first, the church seemed very homey. I came from a small town in Kentucky and live in a city now, so it was nice.
A lot of people at the church also used to live in Kentucky and still have family there, so it was like a small piece of home here with me. The service was short and simple. They started out with singing and then prayer. After the prayer, they opened the side door and invited God, the Holy Spirit, and angels into the church. Then, they had an evangelist come in and preach a sermon. I was getting weird vibes at this point for whatever reason. I figured it was because I hadn't been in so long, and it had to do with a few personal reasons from my last church experiences. I was sort of zoning out while the evangelist was preaching, and he got really into it and was yelling and putting his arm out towards us. Mid-scream/preaching, his microphone messed up and it sounded very demonic and loud. I know those can mess up, so I didn't even think anything of that. So he changes microphones and carries on. While he's going on again, there's knocking at the side door, and all of a sudden it just flies open. I chalked it up to the wind, but when it opened, the wind was blowing in, and it was a very heavy wind today, heavy enough to push my car slightly on the ride to church. The lights also flickered while he was talking. Everyone kept praising God and saying the Spirit was in the church, and really seemed to enjoy those things happening. After the service was over, the preacher's wife went up to the podium and said while this was happening, she could hear everything upstairs. She also said while she was up there, she saw things running by out of the corner of her eye, and a door had been slammed in her face. Not quite sure what to think of all this. I've never experienced something in a public place like that, and definitely never expected to in a church. Like I said, everyone was really into it happening, and said it was God or angels. I'm an open and spiritual person and have experienced a lot of paranormal, but I didn't feel like whatever that was a good thing. I felt bad vibes right before things started happening up until we left there. I don't think it's a demon or anything that serious. I just wanted to share to see if anything similar has happened to others. This is another story about the castle I worked in as a salad chef. As stated before, it was built in 1852. The building is said to contain stones from Whitby Abbey, a 13th century North Yorkshire, England ruin. Now, in the first story I wrote my constant experience with the basement, but this one I'm about to share is about a room. Now, there is an area above the basement that is allowed for customers. That's the bathroom. When you get to that first floor, there are 3 doors on that floor. Men's to the left, women's straight ahead, and to the right is what they made into a dressing/changing room for the main guests for events they host. Now, I don't pay much attention to any room except where it needs to be. I didn't get any eerie feeling from any other room as I did in the basement, so it wasn't like the attention was needed from anywhere else. One day, I walked downstairs to the bathroom. I walked past the changing room and something caught my eye and a feeling came upon me. The room door was open, and when you walked past the door you could see what looked like a 2 or 3 seater sofa next to a small bed table for the lamp. A bit deeper in was a make-up table with a mirror and a chair in front of it. I always see myself in that mirror when I walk by it, when the door is left open. But that day, the glimpse of an old woman sitting in the chair staring at herself in the mirror, her hands resting on the surface. I caught the white of her hair as it was up in a bun. She wore a dress that seemed a bit old, but it was long. The face I couldn't see. It was faceless and her head was slightly hung, but she was in the room with the light off. Mind you, this was a quick 5-second catch of the eye. A 5-second catch that made me stop at the bathroom door. hands on the doorknob, asking myself, WTF did I just see? No customers were allowed in till a certain time, and no worker fitted that description I caught of her. I stared at the door and slowly let go of the bathroom knob so I could walk towards it. Because of course, you walk towards things that you know shouldn't be there. I would probably be the first idiot to die in a horror movie. I stand in front of the door. The only other way out, and this time, the mirror is completely free. No one was in front of it but me. The chair was free and sitting under the respective table. No old woman. I read a bit more into the castle's residences after that. Her appearance seemed to be from the castle's origins in England, so it had to be the residence of the castle after it was built. Turns out that room was the owner's mother, or mother-in-law's bedroom. It was her favorite room. You may like this. I have witnesses to back up this story. Yes, it sounds nuts, but everything you're about to hear is true. My son, who, before this, was a huge skeptic of anything paranormal, but after this, not so much. As a child, I had bad dreams. Dreams of monsters in the wall that would come out and grab me after I fell asleep. I hated to go to bed because of this, and would hang on to the side of the bed as I drifted off, hoping that when they came, I could hold myself from their bony little hands pulling me into the wall. But they would get me anyway. In the wall, I was surrounded by them. Little green faces, yellow eyes. I would wiggle through them and run down the dark tunnels, dragging my hands on the walls in the dark as navigation. I could hear the footfall of my captors, and their squeaky screams behind me tell as I burst through the wall to my bed. Scared, I would lay in the dark and bury myself deep in the covers, sweaty and cold. One day I told one of the monsters to go and never come back. A couple of weeks later I became very sick, with rheumatic fever, and missed a month of first grade. But I never saw the monsters again. Because of all this, I study demonology and magic to this day. I do house cleansings and other ritual work for people. You would think that my childhood dreams were just dreams that gave me a passion in life, but the truth is, the story gets stranger. Last year, and now as a 57-year-old man, I had the chance to go back to the building all this started in. It is a duplex my grandfather owned and my aunt now takes care of. The first floor was also my first house I lived in as a child. This day last year, I was in the upper level with my son and nephew, as well as others in my family, when I felt it. The creepy, dark feeling. I'm going to confront it, I thought. I headed for the narrow steps downstairs. Uncle Hobbs, where are you going? To finish something I should have finished a long time ago. My son piped in with a, "What?" I went down the steps, and the two boys followed. I knocked hard on the door. Nothing came from inside. Bang, 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 again. "Who is it?" came a voice. "Hobbs from next door. Your apartment was my first home. I'm a historian and writer. Could I come in and take a picture of the back bedroom?" I yelled through the door. A lot of this was kind of a lie, but I wanted in. The door opens. "Hi, I'm Hobbs." A scruffy man in old clothes holds out a hand. "Hello, I'm Lenny." I repeat my question to get into the apartment, and as soon as I say would it be alright if I come in, a loud bang sound was heard. It sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the house. I was right next to the front door, at an open screen door. I turned to look and saw nobody outside. I could see the street, and it was void of people. "What the hell was that?" Lenny said as he looked out the door. I turned to my nephew and then my son. Both shook their heads in confusion. "Lenny, I will only take 2 minutes of your time. All I want..."
Bang.
It happened again. We all looked out the door, and nothing. No one talking, no one to be seen anywhere.
Which bedroom do you want to see?
Lenny asks. The small one that faces the driveway.
Bang.
This one was even louder. Lenny and I again look out the door to see nothing. I look at my son, who was up a few steps, and he shakes his head as if to say, nothing outside. Lenny breaks the silence.
Well, all I keep is boxes, storage in that room. It would take some time to clean it out. And it's getting dark and...
What if I come back tomorrow morning? I can bring coffee and donuts. Lenny smiles at me. Looking at the way Lenny lives, he probably doesn't have extra money for treats like donuts.
Sure, that'd be great. 10 a.m.
The door shut. My nephew looked at me and said, Uncle Hobbs? What the hell was that? You just met your first demon. I've seen these figures many times, in several different minds. They are creepy as hell, and I dislike them immensely. My first encounter was just after I'd gotten my black hat, allowing me free access to the entire mine. I was still wet behind the ears, however, and given a job that was essentially a babysitting gig. Go me. The job entailed watching over a machine called a booster drive. It was a machine that was placed along the belt that transported the coal out of the mine on a long wall section. Its whole job was to keep the belt moving and the river of coal moving out of the mine to the process facility. It's usually a cake gig if the beltmen did their job correctly. I shovel up any spilled coal and call in the cavalry if shit goes sideways. Now, unlike 95% of the rest of the mine, the booster drives had lighting installed. The light would spill up the entryway, only so far however. Beyond that point, it was that same inky black nothingness I've described before. I'd been there a few days already, and kept catching movement out of the corners of my eye. I grew up shooting and hunting, so unnatural movement catches my attention pretty rapidly. It would always disappear when I tried to look directly at it. Thing is, I would feel frightened and definitely threatened when I would catch fleeting glances of it. It felt ominous. One day, after a pretty active day of jerking my head at the blackness and seeing movement always retreating into the dark, I got angry and foolish. I called out,
I see you.
Whatever it was took 2 full strides into the light. It was shaped like a man, same size, height and shape, only it was completely black. A complete absence of light. But it had dimension, a thickness, full and thick like a man. I was so scared I got tunnel vision and it seemed like all of the machinery went silent. I know it didn't because the belts were still chugging away. It stood there for about 5 full seconds, did an about face, and walked away into the dark. I stood, staring at the spot for a good 20 seconds afterward, until my vision cleared and the steady roar of the booster filled my ears again. My head stayed on a swivel the rest of the shift. When I was relieved, I asked the man who took my place on the next shift, do you ever see anything moving around down here? He took a long look at me and replied, yes. I asked, what the hell is it? He said, I'm not sure I want to know. I wish I could say I never saw it again. That thing scared the shit out of me. Before I start, I'd like to just say that I've had practically 0 paranormal experiences in my 23 years of life. Although I do believe in the paranormal, I am very skeptical when it comes to believing that these experiences below are supernatural. I am mostly interested in seeing if other people on here have experienced similar things happen in their home. So, as of 2020, there has been some weird activity in my home. I have had in total 3 experiences so far, in which 2 of them are just noises that I've heard, and the other is an actual visual experience. To start off with, the first experience I had was one day when I had just sat down by my computer to play some games, when I heard my guitar, which was behind me, play one faint note by itself. I didn't see the string move, but I know 100% it was the sound of a note being played on my guitar. I was speculating for a moment if I had maybe hit something that would cause the guitar to move, hence playing a note on accident, but I didn't think that was the case. No way I would be able to do that. My guitar always rests in the same location, and I have never had anything like that happen before. It was just weird. The second experience I had was one day when I was sitting on my sofa browsing on my phone. My cabinet next to me suddenly made a loud bang and shook. At first I was really surprised and confused because it happened out of nowhere. But I couldn't explain it, so I simply just ignored it. However, shortly thereafter it happened again. Same bang, same shaking. I just didn't know what to believe. The third and most crazy experience happened when I was watching TV. I was watching TV when I noticed that my cornflakes box suddenly moved on its own, like if someone were to take their hand and pinch it for just a second. This one felt really crazy because I could actually see it move briefly on its own. I just don't know what to make of this, to be honest. The weirdest part is that all of this happened in a very short time span, and since then, it has been quiet, and nothing abnormal has happened since. My girlfriend and I often get bored with our hometown, so we travel our state a lot, exploring abandoned places. Some of these places are also deemed to be haunted. I'm browsing on my computer one day and I find this prison, located about 3 hours from our town. We decide to drive out there on the upcoming 4th of July because we figured no one would be there for the holiday. This prison was very large, with 10 or so buildings, ranging from cell blocks to indoor workout areas. All of these buildings were surrounded by guard towers and fencing that was impossible to enter without breaking the chain links. We parked behind these trees in the front parking lot and walk up to the main building entrance used for prisoner intake. Lucky for us, the front door simply opened and we could walk right in. We passed through that building and here we are now, inside the prison itself. It's a very open space with sidewalks and courtyards connecting the buildings. However, there were little things that seemed off about the whole place. Dead crows that lined the sidewalks were the most noticeable. It was like they flew over the prison and just fell out of the sky. Even the graffiti was made up of weird symbols that we didn't understand. We passed all that, a little on edge now, and as we walked, I saw letters on the buildings. A, B, C were regular cell blocks. When we passed B, I thought to myself that we should check it out because B is the first letter of my name. Odd thought to have, but I went with it. The cell blocks formed the shape of a T, and in the middle of the T was a guard station with a ladder leading them to the second floor if they needed to go up there without having to interact with the inmates. This upstairs area connected to a hallway that led to a boiler room and a door with stairs leading down the side of the building. I walked up those stairs and past the boiler room, but I stopped dead in my tracks when I got to this hallway. I shined my phone flashlight into the hallway, and even though it was daytime outside, my light only went 1 inch into this area. I felt myself shiver, even though I live in the south and it's 90 degrees out. I asked out loud,
If there's someone here with us, make yourself known.
I'm sure this was a mistake, but I didn't mean it negatively. I just felt compelled to say it. From this pitch black darkness, I hear a noise that sounded like something scurrying away, such as a small animal. I figure that's all it was that made me nervous when, all of a sudden, I hear footsteps, full on sprinting, directly at me. It sounded like whatever it was had massive feet and could run unnaturally fast. I ran out of the building and down the stairs with my girlfriend right in front of me. We both looked at each other and determined that, whatever it was, it did not want us here. We did end up walking around just a little more on other parts of the property, but we felt watched the entire time. As we left through the front door, we felt better, almost as if we were released from an unpleasant fog of energy. We had sage in the car and burned some, which also helped us feel better. I try not to think about it often, but I do wonder what we encountered. There was a house in my area that burnt down several years ago, when I was still a child and living in my old house. There are no reported deaths, but I beg to differ. When I was around 12 years old, and whilst the house was still relatively fresh from the fire, me and a friend decided to go inside and explore it for whatever reason. There was an unlocked window which we climbed through, and although my memory is a bit hazy, I do remember the staircase being black and ashen, the walls and ceiling ripping apart, etc. I also remember walking into a room which looked like a child's room. There was a framed picture of 2 girls, some family photos and whatnot. Me and my friend left soon after. The house got remodeled and, frankly, I forgot about it. Cue a few years later. Me and my family moved from our old small house into a new 2-story house in our area that we still live in to this day. And you guessed it, it's that same house that burnt down. Now, things were fine for a few years. I didn't experience anything weird. That, however, changed around 2 years ago, when I began seeing and hearing things, mainly in my room and occasionally around the house as well. It started off with voices, especially when I would be going to sleep. I have no history of any mental health issues, so this was a new occurrence for me. I'd be laying on my side, trying to go to sleep, and I would hear a woman's voice, singing into my ear. She would sing, whisper, unintelligible things, sometimes speak to me, but I could never make out anything she was saying. It was the most surreal thing ever because it would be as though she was right next to me or above me, but every time I'd turn around to see who's there, nobody would be. This then escalated into hearing voices of 2 girls. It wouldn't be in my ear as before, and rather around the entire room. They would sing kids' songs, rhymes, etc. I then began hearing constant knocking on my door, and the floor creaking in my room as though someone was walking around. I even called out a few times to see if anyone was there. I'd ask my sister if she was at my door, and she'd always say no. This went on for a while, before I actually began to see her. Not the kids, but the woman. I'd see her all the time, and they'd always be split-second glances and she would disappear. She would be in the creepiest places and positions too. A lot of the time, I'd see her in the corners of the ceiling in my room, right above my head, on all fours and clutching into the ceiling. I saw her like this, as I walked past my sister's room as well. I'd see her walking down the stairs, head down, hand on the rail. Sometimes she would stand in my room and just look at me. Again, I would only ever see her for a second at most, but it's so vivid in my memory. Weird thing is, she has never scared me. Sure, the knocking and voices freaked me out at first, but when I actually began seeing her, there was no fear at all. It was quite calming, actually. I'd tried to talk to her sometimes too. She'd obviously never respond. Nowadays I haven't seen her much. The kids' chants have gone, but I still occasionally hear her whispering or humming into my ear when I'm about to sleep. I move rooms as well, so maybe that's why. Sometimes I do end up sleeping in my old room, and those are the nights where I hear her the most. My cat, however, still stares at the door and the ceiling, and at an empty spot in my room. Sometimes she hisses. Sometimes she just meows. I've told my mum my experience, and my sister. Both haven't seen or heard her specifically, but they both believe me and think something is wrong with the house. So, I live in a basement in my parent-in-law's house, and my wife never goes down to my room in the basement. I'm almost always in there alone. Since I've lived in there, a few things have been happening that I dismissed as ventilation or something or another, such as my door slowly creeping open. Frankly, I wouldn't even have noticed it opening if it weren't for the green indicator light of something I have plugged into the wall outside my room. At night, if I have to leave my room, I exit and make an immediate left and dip into the bathroom for restroom use. I can almost always sense an entity in the living/bar area of the basement. This feeling is compounded when I exit the bathroom and my reflection appears on the sliding doors across from the bathroom. Sometimes I do not have a face in my reflection. I quickly re-enter my bathroom and shut and lock the door. Some nights, there is a knocking from within my mattress that wakes me up, usually between 3 a.m. and 3:15. I have no way of dealing with this, other than risking it and fleeing upstairs to my son's room. My son, 3, has autism, and frequently says, "That's scary," over and over in the basement, looking towards the bathroom and living areas. The light switches that I have access to when leaving the room frequently cease to function right when I need them, or will flicker out almost violently as I'm on the staircase halfway up and out of the basement. I can hear rustling in the middle of the night sometimes as well, and I usually convince myself that it's a mouse. Lately, this has escalated to the sound of footsteps in the ceiling in the middle of the night. Most recently, when I heard these footsteps, there was no one home but me, and I searched the house while wielding a knife for an intruder to find no one home. I think this entity is aware that I know it exists, and I interacted with it via the mirror once, and it contorted my face. Any idea what it is or if I should be concerned? When I was 14 years old, I went to a church gathering on Halloween night that was called Hallelujah Night, a Christian alternative to Halloween. My family and I would get there in the afternoon since we'd volunteer to help set up the booths, cakewalk, candy barrels, etc. But I was mostly there to get first dibs on all the candy. After I finished helping with the usual booth I helped set up, I took a seat on a bench near the main sanctuary. It was my favorite place to sit at since I could see the entire lot and, most of all, the beautiful sunset. I pulled out my PSP and was scrolling through some music I had on it when some guy approached me and started a conversation. I've never been a people person, so usually when things like this happen, I keep the conversation short. However, this guy had this weird type of warmth to him, as if he was a friend of mine. As the conversation carried on, I started to ask him if he was new because I hadn't seen him before. He told me that he had been going to this church for years, but left after an incident happened. When I asked him about the incident, he paused, looked at me and said that there's some things people pick up on that they know aren't normal. Also that you should never get curious about things that you know you should leave alone. I had a sort of confused look on my face since I didn't know what he meant at the time. The guy noticed it and said that I would understand once I got older. I looked down at my PSP that I had in my hand still and looked back up, and the guy was gone. I looked around and couldn't find him anywhere in the lot, except for a few people still prepping for a Hallelujah night. It didn't make any sense. Fast forward to a few months later, I was sitting in the main sanctuary before leaving to do my usual volunteer work on the upper floor of the main sanctuary. The upper floor was a daycare center for kids, so at the end of service, volunteers escort the children downstairs and would go into each room, shutting off the lights and making sure no children were still up there. I'll never forget getting up to leave to do my usual duties when the pastor started talking about an upcoming funeral. I looked at the big screens on each side of the main sanctuary, and the face that was of the man I was talking to during Hallelujah night was there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. To this day it still seems unreal. I was beyond shook as I made my way out of the main sanctuary and onto the flights of big stairs as I went to the upper floor. Once I made it to the upper floor, another volunteer had confirmed that all the children were escorted downstairs. She noticed that I had looked sort of pale from seeing what I saw in the main sanctuary and asked me if I was okay. I told her it was nothing and proceeded to cut off all the lights on the upper floor as she left downstairs. The upper floor was like a giant hallway with doors on each side and a door at the end of the hallway with a giant window in it. When I came to the last room at the end of the hall, I would always leave the blinds on that big window open since the light always illuminated the dark hallway and made me feel less scared. But as I left the room, I remember feeling panicked. It started freezing and I felt like if I left that room, something was waiting for me in the darkened rooms that was going to jump out and attack me. As I'm trying to muster up the courage to just run for it, I see the small head of a child peek out a couple of doors down. It stayed there for a few seconds and then put its head back in the room. I immediately called out to the child, but no answer. The fear I had a minute ago was gone as I left the last room to go through the illuminated hallway. I made it to the other room in a matter of seconds, cutting on the lights and searching the entire room for the child I saw. But no one was there. I started getting spooked again as I cut off the lights in that room. Then one of the most terrifying things I have ever seen and experienced happened. As I was leaving the room, I looked back at the last room's window, which illuminated the hallway. And out of nowhere, a massive black mass moved in front of the window, almost covering the light completely. It was darker than black, and its outline as it covered the light seemed to be moving. It was enough to scare me to run for my life. I ran the rest of the hallway and down the stairs. I was stopped by one of the ushers who told me not to run, but when I told him what I saw, he looked at me as if I was crazy. Once church was over, I told my parents about what happened on the ride home, and they ended up not believing me since they're skeptics. But I know what I saw that day, and it's something that still scares me to this very day. I have always enjoyed the paranormal for entertainment, but kept with me a healthy dose of skepticism when it came to real-life stories. Growing up, my mother was very much into the supernatural or anything paranormal. Psychic, ghosts, the afterlife, you name it. This instilled in me from a very young age a skeptical outlook on things of this nature. Instead, I would learn how psychic and paranormal experts fake evidence or cold read, and things of this nature to basically debunk my mum. Although I always was entertained by her stories on some level. She would always tell me stories about how my supposed gift to communicate with ghosts from a young age, and how my family members refused to babysit me because I creeped them out too much. I also have a lot of memories of being young and strange, unexplainable and downright creepy things happening to me all the time. But I would cope with it by justifying how there must be some logical explanation, such as sleepwalking or just my overactive child's imagination or something. There is one experience though that always stuck with me. I witnessed as an adult. I wouldn't say it changed my mind, but there is something about this I cannot let go of or rationalize away. I even get emotional and start to tear up a little when I think about it today, which is unlike me. I am now 28 years old, but when I was 21 I worked at a 4-star hotel spa named Airth Castle in Scotland, located just outside of Stirling, where many of the bloody and violent wars Scotland is historically known for took place. This is a real place, and already has a reputation for being haunted. Feel free to Google it if you like. I wanted to tell you my experiences of working in this hotel, and the strange events I experienced while working there. To give context, the hotel is made up of 2 main buildings. The first is a new building, a typical hotel where the guests stay with luxury dining and spa, etc. The other building is the castle itself, which is mainly only used for weddings, and one time, Sean Penn stayed with us while filming a movie. That was pretty cool. I worked as a kitchen porter. My job was to wash dishes, clean up, basically all the kitchen duties which didn't involve cooking, to allow the chef to focus on preparing the food. Whenever there was a wedding which needed to be catered for, some of us would be sent up to the castle to work there. Eventually I refused to work in the castle. Of course, the staff there knew about the castle's reputation and would tell each other stories about what they had heard. In my skeptical mind, I simply rationalized it as local entertainment and just got on with my work. One of the most frequent occurrences that would be reported is that whenever guests would stay in the castle, they would phone the front desk in the main building and tell us that they could hear children playing and running around, and ask if we could send someone up to deal with the children. There were never any children in the building. The castle was always reserved for the bride and groom to have their place to themselves. I cannot stress how common this complaint was. Almost everyone who stayed in the castle reported the same story of being disturbed by the sounds of children playing in the hallways. Sometimes, late at night, I could hear the sounds of running coming from the upstairs balcony in the central room of the castle. If I was ever brave enough to go investigate, it would stop. The basement floor of the castle has been turned into a few guest rooms and storage space for the staff to use. It looked like any other floor of a hotel, not the creepy basement of a castle you would expect. There are reports that this floor is haunted by a groundskeeper, and also I have a few stories about people telling me about a phantom dog they could hear barking. I never encountered either of these spirits, but the reason I am mentioning it is that the basement floor of this castle especially terrified me. Every time I was there, I felt the most uncomfortable feeling. Like when people tell you they feel like someone is watching them or something. That entire floor gave me the most uneasy feeling, as if I could feel someone breathing down my neck, or I was surrounded by something. I was never able to go down there without feeling stiff and having the most horrible feeling of dread come over me. It's hard to put into words. I hated going down there. If you stand outside the castle facing it, there's a dining room just to the left of the entrance on the ground floor. In this room, there is an enormous painting of a woman. I forget who she is, a wife of the commander or something who lived there. The painting was also especially creepy. She had such a stern look on her face, which, I guess, was common for that era and style. Very regal looking. There were a lot of unexplained noises that came from the area this painting is located, like knocking and banging, etc. One time a group of us were standing in that room, commenting on how depressing the painting looked, only to be interrupted by a slow, scratching noise that went all the way from the top to the bottom of the 10-foot-high wall the painting was hanging on. Old castles like this do not have hollow walls. Not like a loose piece of stone could have been falling inside the hollow wall or anything, which was my first thought. We could not figure out where this noise came from. My most frightening moment inside that castle happened one night during a wedding. The chefs had finished with their jobs and had taken everything back down to the main building. I was left in the kitchen to finish washing up and cleaning. The guests had left and the bride and groom were, well, it's not my business what they were up to. The only other people in the castle were a few remaining waiting staff, also finishing tidying up. I went out the side door to the castle to have a cigarette. Let me take a second to describe the layout of the kitchen for you. The southwest corner of the kitchen was the entrance to the kitchen. The southeast corner was the washing up area where I was working. The northeast corner was a passageway to a small room where we kept plates, cutlery, and a walk-in fridge. When I came back into the kitchen after finishing my cigarette, I could hear someone working in the back room, moving cutlery around and stacking plates. Normal sounds of someone else working, so I paid no attention to it and got back to washing dishes. After a few minutes, I heard the working sounds from the other room stop, and the room fell silent for a while. Sounded like no one was moving, which I thought was strange. Another piece of information that you need to know is that me and one of the girls I worked with at the time would play this game where we would try to creep up on each other and scare the other person. When the sounds of the working stopped and there was an unusual silence, I figured, this is that girl. She's trying to scare me. My plan was to continue working like normal. Then, when she jumped out to try to scare me, I would just be cool as a cucumber and be like, nice try, haha. I waited for a full minute. She never jumped out. I waited for a second minute. Still nothing. Thinking she was just really committed to this joke, I went to investigate. I walked into this room and nobody was there. I cannot describe how hard my heart jumped when I walked into the room to find nobody there. I started questioning my own sanity and freaking out. I definitely heard someone working back there for a good 30 to 60 seconds before it stopped. The workstations the chefs used formed kind of an alley you had to walk through to get out of the kitchen. Nobody could have left the kitchen without walking directly by me washing the dishes, and since I was on high alert, I definitely would have noticed someone leaving. The incident really freaked me out. I had to leave the building for a while and really did not want to go back in to finish my shift. Another time I was working in the same kitchen and the night security guy came through looking confused and told me to follow him. This security guy also had more than his fair share of creepy stories while walking around this building at night. But we will get back to that in a minute. He took me through to a room at the back which had a small bar and was used to entertain the wedding guests sometimes. This room was not in use that night. He asked me to tell him if I could smell anything. Upon stepping into this room, I immediately was hit with an overwhelming smell of cigar smoke. He insisted nobody had been using this room, and the guests left a while ago. Apparently, this room was previously used as the aforementioned commander's study, where he would draw up battle plans and spend time alone. Since I was normally working quite late, I knew this night security guy pretty well. We talked about all the creepy stuff we had both encountered in the castle, and he was insistent that it was not just stories. He began telling me all of his stories and just how common they occurred. After all, he was the guy who had to go check the castle out every time a guest complained about children running around. He told me his encounters were so frequent and unignorable. He had begun to do deep research into the history of the castle and its previous inhabitants. Apparently, there were 2 children who had died in a fire there once, the children of the woman in the painting in the dining room. Their nanny had run back into the building to try and save them, and was also killed by the fire. The night security guard told me he had personally taken a photograph of the castle, and in one of the upstairs rooms, slightly left of the entrance, you could clearly see a nanny with 2 children standing in front of her looking out the window at him. Although shaken from other strange experiences a little, my rational, skeptical mind was still there. He was a tall, slim man in his 40s, spent a lot of time alone, walking around the castle, investigating disturbances constantly. I figured he might have been exaggerating or making it up for a good ghost story, but the next day he brought in the photo to show me. In the upstairs window, just like he said, was 2 children and their nanny looking directly out the window, clear as day. I don't know if that man still works there or not, but he owns a picture that will give you the creeps. He doesn't seem to have put it online. I looked. If anyone from Airth Castle reads this, and a man matching that description still works there as a night security guard, tell him I am looking for this picture. Once he showed me this photo, that was the last time I was ever in that castle. Every time a wedding was happening, I would refuse to go cater for it. I'm not going, send someone else. Eventually I was fired from that job because me and the manager would frequently fall out over this. But I honestly don't care. I never wanted to go near that place again. Despite keeping my skepticism, I admit there was something about that place that just wasn't right. I will remember that job and that castle until the day I die. Just thinking about being back in that building gives me the creeps. One last thing. If you did decide to Google this castle, you may see that there was a national news story about the castle where someone snapped a photo during one of the weddings and captured an eerie green ghost shape in the picture. This photo was taken in the room we smelled the cigar smoke in. Although this is an old news story, I didn't read about it or see this picture until today. This is what triggered me to share these stories. I hope you enjoyed them. Attached to this story is a photograph of a house. From the outside, it seems to be some average, nondescript house. The kind of place you'd likely find in any city or small town. It's not though. This house is like something out of the Twilight Zone or a Stephen King novel. So you see, I lived in this house when I was 11 to 12 years old. That was 1993 to 1994. My room was the one above the porch with the double window. My sister's room was across the hall. My mother and my brothers lived downstairs. During the time we lived there, strange things occurred. Some of them you may find hard to believe, and that's fine. I can only assure you that they actually happened. Some 26 years after the fact, I can still provide you no evidence, and only my solemn word that everything I'm about to tell you is the absolute truth. For starters, sometimes our clocks would run backwards for no discernible reason. We changed the batteries and checked them for defects, but nothing seemed to be amiss. They just randomly started running in reverse from time to time. There was also an issue with our basement. How do I describe this? I guess the best way would be to say that the basement seemed to be a portal to hell. We would hear strange noises coming from down there that couldn't be explained away as creaking pipes or the house settling on its foundation. Things like demonic growling, roaring, when someone had to go down there to do laundry, There was a sound like people whispering, and the whole area had an unsettling feel to it. We had this dog, a German Shepherd named Lassie. She was an exceptionally brave, loyal and protective dog, but she would not go near the basement or the basement door. Eventually, she became so terrified that she ran away and never came back. There was also a night when we all woke up to a big black crow in the house, flying madly around. This was in the ungodly hours of the morning, mind you, so no one would have been up to open the door or window to let it in. If you can even imagine an intelligent bird like a crow flying through an opening into a human dwelling like some kind of idiotic sparrow. There were no holes in the roof and no place for it to get in or out. Where did it come from and where did it go? I have no memory of us actually getting the bird out of the house, but I never saw it again. Then there was the man. At the back of the house was a hallway that led off to the dining room and past the kitchen towards the lower floor bedrooms. The twins, mere toddlers at the time, had their nursery in the rearmost room on the left. They would sit back there and have conversations with someone that none of us could see. They referred to this person as simply the man. The man seemed to enjoy keeping the boys company, but he was never anything but benign. One day while the rest of us were at school, my mum had the twins in their high chairs, feeding them lunch. When she stepped away to do something, maybe get something from the kitchen, answer the phone, I don't remember, there was a crash and the sound of screaming. One of the twins was on the floor. His high chair tipped over. He'd bashed his head really hard. The high chairs had been secured on flat footing before she started. When she asked the other twin what happened, he replied, "The man did it." My little brother ended up in hospital in a coma for a long time. You might be happy to know that he survived, and today he is married with 2 beautiful daughters. But CPS didn't believe that my mother was innocent and began to stalk us. They would park across the street from our house and watch us. They would drop in unexpectedly. They were looking for a reason to take us and put us in foster care. This is how we ultimately ended up leaving the house. Rather than deal with any more tragedy or weirdness or stalking, we packed up what we could and moved across the country. What we couldn't take with us we left behind. I asked my mother once, about 5 years before she died, if she'd ever actually seen the entity that the boys referred to as the man. She said she had, but only once. She said she was walking past the kitchen door one day and had caught the sight of someone in her peripheral vision. A tall man, wearing dark clothes, standing with his back to her, staring out of the kitchen window. When she turned to get a better look, he was gone. That house scared the crap out of all of us. There was always a feeling like we were being watched. Thankfully, it is many years and many miles behind us. When we left, there was no one to pay the mortgage, so the bank took possession. Because of this, today, it is privately owned by people I don't know. For that reason, I will not disclose the location. I won't even tell you what state it's in. If you're ever unfortunate enough to stumble upon it, however, I advise you to keep walking. Don't stop to look. Because if you stop to take a look at this place, there's likely something you can't see staring back at you. Update. My sister informed me after the original posting that my mum told her that walking in the upstairs hallway, she could hear growling and breathing behind her. I hadn't been aware of that detail, so it makes for a truly unnerving addition. Following last post, I received some questions concerning what I saw, what I thought it was, and what, if anything, I thought it wanted. I think I wanted to know these answers, but the truth may have been too much to handle. This thing creates intense feelings of doom. Whether it emits this intense emotion or it is a natural reaction to such an unnatural thing, I don't know. This story concerns another encounter with this awful thing. I was working the same supposed cakewalk gig at the same booster location. This thing was discussed between the man I relieved, myself, and the man who relieved me. We were all generally terrified of it. Some days we would notice it hanging around, just out of the light, making 10-hour shifts seem like an eternity of looking over our shoulders. Other days it would be completely absent. The days it was absent weren't exactly the best either. It was almost as bad wondering where that thing was than actually seeing it out there, pacing, flitting about, or worse, just watching us in our peripheral vision on the bare edge of the light. This shift I was on started like any usual. I attempted to mentally prep myself for another day of shoveling spilled coal while having the shit scared out of me for the next 10 or so hours. After riding the man trip into the booster, I spoke to the stressed out scared man I was relieving. I told him about the weather topside, as we were expecting snow by the time he got outside. He told me it had been a quiet day and he hadn't seen any glimpses of our shadowy visitor. We bullshit for a bit while he waited for the man trip that would be his ride out of the mine. Eventually, it arrived, and he wished me luck while I told him to have a safe drive home. I was watching the belt cruise along, transporting all that black rock out of the mine, when suddenly, all of the power kicked off. My work area was instantly plunged into the pitch blackness, and the dull roar of the machinery coasted to a stop. The sudden change from bright light and noise to quiet blackness was unnerving. I turned on my cap light and made my way to the power center that controls the juice to check if the power kicked locally or if it was more widespread across the mine. I found all my breakers still set, meaning the outage was more than my booster. I got on my radio and confirmed the situation with the power was mine-wide. I made a seat with some bags of rock dust and leaned against the airlock wall to settle in for a bit. It was at this point I heard it. Footsteps. There were footsteps walking toward me, but no one was there. I was hoping upon hope I would not see that black human-shaped mass out there in the dark. I live in an apartment/house that is meant for student housing. It's 2 stories with 5 bedrooms, each with their own private bathroom. There's also a kitchen and living room area downstairs. I live in one of the bedrooms downstairs, right next to the bedroom door. Over the past week, I've had 3 separate paranormal experiences that I just have no real explanation for. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe I've encountered something. The first thing that happened was at around 2:30 a.m. I was home alone and cleaning my bathroom while waiting for a friend to come over. I heard this enormous crash and thought someone had broken in through the glass-paned back door. Instead, what I had found was that the glass light cover in front of my bedroom had somehow detached from the fixture and shattered across the ground, leaving glass everywhere. The light bulbs themselves had not been broken, but nonetheless, I was left incredibly shaken thinking about how that could have fallen on someone. After that, my dog refused to walk out of my bedroom. I had to carry her into her kennel in the next room where she normally sleeps at night. Her choice. The next day I cleaned the kitchen with my friend, and one of the things we focused on was the dishwasher, because there was a gross smell coming from it. Later, when we were resting on the couch, both the microwave and dishwasher turned themselves on at the exact same time. The microwave didn't have anything on its screen, and the washing machine was turned to the pots and pans setting, a setting my household doesn't really use. Then yesterday, I left my house to go pick up some necessities from Walgreens with my friend, making sure the door was locked before I left because there's been a lot of crime in the area. I even go as far as to shake the door before I leave, to double check it's locked correctly because the door doesn't always lock correctly. I can say with 100% certainty that the door was completely locked and closed. When I got back, however, the door was wide open, and my friend and I had to comb the house with our defense weapons, pepper spray and a prayer, yelling to anyone that might have been inside that they needed to leave. Luckily, nobody was in my house or took anything, but the experiences I've been having are starting to spook me quite a bit and leaving me on edge. Hell, now I can't sleep because of these new detailed and graphic nightmares I'm having. They involve shootings, crushed fetuses, and just in general some of the most disturbing dreams I've ever had. All of these things combined have left me nervous and wondering, am I dealing with more than just janky student housing and stress? Any and all advice is greatly appreciated. Thanks ahead of time. So I live in the country, northern Texas, and I go to this basically abandoned mall, except for 3 stores still open. One of the stores still open is an indoor playground for toddlers and kids. Well, you never would suspect anything haunting a playground, right? I wouldn't either, but this really happened to me a few days ago. So I brought my toddler to play in this indoor playground, the kind that has slides, jump houses, arcade games, that kind of place. We were the only ones in the store. We were going through this maze and going up this slide. All of a sudden, I hear 2 ladies yelling loud in the slide. It sounded like a really loud argument. So loud, I took my babies out of the slide. I then investigated around and absolutely no one was around. Then I went down the slide and there was a rattling right in back of me as I went down. It felt like it was following me, and I would stop in the middle of the slide to investigate, and it would continue to rattle, like it had a consciousness. I then heard another voice right behind me, loud. Turned round and no one was there. I didn't say any of this to my daughters, but my eldest, 3 years old, had started freaking out and said she felt like something was following her, and said she thinks something is there and it's mad. I wanted to make sure it wasn't just my imagination, so I put my fears to the side and really investigated the slides. I really tried to confront whatever was there. I don't know what is there, but from me and my daughter's experience, it's paranormal. Sometime this week I will bring my husband there and have him see for himself. He's super skeptical and doesn't believe in this stuff. So I'll give an update soon. I grew up in the countryside in Ireland, literally in the middle of nowhere. The house was originally a small cottage. My parents bought it before I was born and they renovated it and added an extension on. There was 5 other houses on our country road, the closest being a large field away. I don't know much about the history of our house, the land it was built on, or the history of the area, other than an elderly lady lived in the cottage before my parents bought it, and she passed away in a nursing home. The only info I have about the area is it was old, and it was a civil parish. Civil parishes are units of territory in the island of Ireland that have their origins in old Gaelic territorial divisions. Some other things worth noting before I get into the experiences. Behind our house, across a newly built road, was an old graveyard and the ruins of an old church enclosed in a stone wall. When I say old, I mean the gravestones were tipping over, sinking into the ground, and you couldn't read the writing on them anymore. You could see the graveyard from mine and my brother's bedroom windows. On top of that, when they built that new road, they built it when I was a kid as a new main road into town, archaeologists discovered signs of an early medieval monastery, the site dating back between the 6th and 9th century. They also found some old signs of medieval settlements, some artifacts like tools, etc., relating to that time period, as well as undated burial activity. Some scattered human bones and remains were also found. In the field right next to our house was also the ruins of what looked like a small cluster of old stone houses too, and there was something similar further down the road. So, on to the experiences. Whenever we get together as a family, we always end up talking about the house and what we experienced. We moved out 6 years ago. I don't know who or what it was, but there was definitely more than one ghost or spirit. It seemed like a lot. I don't know if it has anything to do with that graveyard, what they found, the house or the land itself. I really don't feel like it was the woman that lived there before us either. My mum, dad, 2 brothers, myself obviously, and friends that stayed over, all experienced something or got a weird vibe. Funnily enough, almost everything that happened in the new and built on part of the house, rather than the old part, and stuff happened outside too. I would often feel like there was someone in my room, and I don't know why, but I felt like it was a man. I would never chill in my room alone, and I dread nighttime coming to go to sleep. I just felt like someone was there. I heard what sounded like someone walking around, not footsteps, but just like the movement of someone. I often felt like I was being watched, inside and outside. Fair enough, that could just have been my imagination or me freaking myself out as a kid. On multiple occasions, I heard what sounded like children talking and playing, but no one would be there. On one occasion, I heard what sounded like a choir singing in the direction of the graveyard and church. And on a separate occasion, I heard what sounded like drums being played. It was like this weird, repetitive rhythm, hard to describe. Another time, I was outside, playing near the side of the house. I was kneeling down and it was as if someone threw a small stone or pebble, not at me but in my direction from behind. We had stone chippings in our garden. I heard the stone land as if someone threw it, and it happened 3 times within like 20 seconds of each other. I turned around, but of course no one was there. On another occasion, I went to bed really early when it was still bright out. I remember this so vividly, I can even remember the duvet cover that was on. So I was lying down, wide awake, and it felt as if someone poked me pretty hard. It was like a strong index finger poke in my lower back. I kind of froze, freaked out, didn't turn around and just convinced myself that it was one of my teddy's paws, and didn't think about it again until years later. From the living room window, my brother saw a man in a hat smoking a cigarette, standing outside and leaning against the wall near the front door. He got up like, who the hell is that? He went out and no one was there, or anywhere near, and he didn't hear him run away. You could hear people move even the slightest bit on the stone chippings. This brings me to my next point. On a couple of occasions, my mum heard someone knock on the back door, but when she went to answer it, no one was there. Again, she didn't hear them walk or run away. Another time, she saw the silhouette of someone, again smoking, through the window of the back door as if they were standing outside the door. As usual, no one was there. On a couple of occasions, she felt as though someone was sitting in the back of the car with her when she left our house to go to the shop in the late evenings. The feeling was so strong that she'd keep looking in the mirror, and even stop the car and look under the seats to make sure no one was back there. My dad, who was a skeptic, saw a black shadow down the end of the hall go from one side to the other. My other brother felt like someone touched his foot in bed, and on a couple of occasions heard what sounded like someone walking down the hallway and stopping outside his door, as if they were going to come in but were hesitating. He would call out to see who it was, but no one answered, so it wasn't any of us. He would also see the hallway lights being turned on and off, and when he was outside around the back garden, he would get the sudden urge or feeling that he should go inside, and he would run. Which is weird because I used to feel that way too. Our dog stared and barked at nothing a couple of times, and a friend of mine that stayed over hated when she had to wake up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night because she felt like someone was watching her from the end of the hallway. So that's that. Sorry this was long and maybe a bit rambly. I hope you enjoyed listening to it, and I'd love to hear any of your thoughts as to what was going on. I've wanted to share this for a while. So, I live in a basement in my parent-in-law's house, and my wife never goes down to my room in the basement. I'm almost always in there alone. Since I've lived in there, a few things have been happening that I dismissed as ventilation or something or another, such as my door slowly creeping open. Frankly, I wouldn't even have noticed it opening if it weren't for the green indicator light of something I have plugged into the wall outside my room. At night, if I have to leave my room, I exit and make an immediate left and dip into the bathroom for restroom use. I can almost always sense an entity in the living/bar area of the basement. This feeling is compounded when I exit the bathroom and my reflection appears on the sliding doors across from the bathroom. Sometimes I do not have a face in my reflection. I quickly re-enter my bathroom and shut and lock the door. Some nights, there is a knocking from within my mattress that wakes me up, usually between 3 a.m. and 3:15. I have no way of dealing with this, other than risking it and fleeing upstairs to my son's room. My son, 3, has autism, and frequently says, "That's scary," over and over in the basement, looking towards the bathroom and living areas. The light switches that I have access to when leaving the room frequently cease to function right when I need them, or will flicker out almost violently as I'm on the staircase halfway up and out of the basement. I can hear rustling in the middle of the night sometimes as well, and I usually convince myself that it's a mouse. Lately, this has escalated to the sound of footsteps in the ceiling in the middle of the night. Most recently, when I heard these footsteps, there was no one home but me, and I searched the house while wielding a knife for an intruder to find no one home. I think this entity is aware that I know it exists, and I interacted with it via the mirror once, and it contorted my face. Any idea what it is or if I should be concerned? A little history on the church before we start. This church has been in the same location for nearly 200 years. Although the buildings have been updated, you can't go in the church outside of normal operating hours or in small groups without having an experience. I have several stories that I would like to share, but I'll start with the first thing that happened to us. This takes place when we're around 12-13 years old. My friend, David, the custodian's son, and I were at the church helping to set up for an event that was to take place later on in the evening. We weren't alone completely. There was only a handful of people in the building, all of whom were on the ground floor. We were tasked with the mission of retrieving a roll of tape from the second floor, so we take a shortcut through the back of the church that has a very narrow staircase that leads directly into the sanctuary. Our destination is the secretary's office, which is right beside the sanctuary. As we are walking through the sanctuary, we both hear what sounds exactly like a very loud heartbeat coming from no particular area. We run out of the sanctuary before even getting the tape and try to figure out where the sound may have come from, coming up with the conclusion that it was supernatural, considering there is no type of instrument in our church that could have made it, and it was too loud to be coming from the ground floor where everyone else is. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, and we are having a gathering at the church. The area where the previously mentioned staircase is has always been a popular place for the kids to play that is out of the way. So I'm in there with the kids because most of them are my cousins, and I like to pick on them. They were all daring each other to go in the small storage area that is under the staircase. My youngest cousin, who is about 5, crawls out from under the stairs and says that he saw something under them. I ask him what it is, to which he replies, "I saw a beating heart." He's never heard me talk about hearing the heartbeat, so it gave me chills hearing it. I've also never considered him someone to have a wild imagination either. It may have been a coincidence, but with all the experiences I've had in that church, I'm tempted to believe him. I'm from Central Europe. In my town there is an old abandoned castle from the 1750s. After the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was a hotel up until the 1950s. It has been abandoned ever since. It's not much of a tourist attraction as far as I know, but people do visit occasionally. For example, someone's relative or friend comes to visit them, so they take a walk to the park and, "Oh, that castle is cool, let's go see it." As kids, we experienced weird stuff there, mostly in the basement. The interior of the castle is nothing special. There is always sunlight inside. Nothing scary about that, but there are 2 main basements, a couple of hidden ones that the older generation of kids found. It's nothing special, just 2 or 3 small rooms that looks like a place where you'd hide fancy booze back in the day. And then there's a tunnel that leads to another village. It was built strictly as an escape tunnel that is all blocked up by dirt and who knows what. So the history of the castle says that a group of soldiers were escaping, and others just threw a ton of stuff and blocked them in. They blocked the way for about 5 meters deep from both sides. That is still a long-ass tunnel, about 2 kilometers, 1.243 miles. Nobody knew much about it before an army went to explore the tunnel around the 1960s. As my dad says, they found nothing and didn't go deeper than 150 meters. They got claustrophobic because the tunnel would start at 2 meters wide, and after about 70 to 80 meters in, the tunnel was half the size and the air was tight. Another reason for not going deeper was they kept stumbling upon groups of bricks that fell off the wall. They blocked it up again. During the late 90s, 2 homeless people died there. One in the basement, and the other one was drunk and probably fell down the stairs inside the castle. Anyway, it's the scariest stuff to go down there alone on a sunny day, let alone at night. I tried it once and never again, even though you can see sunlight for about 10 steps in. I remember we used to explore down there before football practice. We just wandered around the castle, and after we got bored with it, we went down in the basement. Obviously, you need a flashlight or some kind of light, and if that dies, well, you can easily get lost in there and get paranoid very quick and probably die of a panic attack. Older guys from my town messed around there too. They even broke the wall in the tunnel, went there themselves, but not deeper than 10 to 20 steps because you start feeling that air pressure and it stinks like 3 possums crawled in there and died. It was opened like that for a couple of days back in the mid-2000s. Every single person that went inside said it was creepy, and you always felt like someone or something was all around you. So me and a couple of buds went inside there. I can't describe that odd feeling of looking straight into the depths of the tunnel, knowing it's 2 kilometers long. The longer you look, the more paranoid and nauseous you get. It's such a suffocating and anxious feeling. And also because of the smell, you can't be in there for longer than a minute. You simply need to get out in the fresh air and come back in again. One kid thought it was a good idea to run into the tunnel to see what was beyond those 20 steps. I was there, as were many others. It was popular for us teens and preteens to mess around in that tunnel, knowing that it will be cemented back in a matter of days. So we saw the idiot run inside. We obviously see the light moving as he moves, but we can't see him. After probably 3 seconds of running, he was about 15 meters deep into the tunnel. The weird thing was seeing the light turn to us and then the other way. He was doing that for a couple of seconds. It seemed like he was disorientated, even though there are only 2 options to go. He started yelling that he's lost, but we barely heard him. Then quickly he started screaming, and one of the older guys went in a little to light the way. That helped him, and he started walking towards us, and then he just collapsed. He probably passed out from the smell and the air pressure. We got him out. He was so pale, and the weird thing was that he had this sort of stain on his shirt, a muddy stain. It looked like someone hit him over the back with a large muddy log, but it was summer. Everything inside was dry. Maybe the tunnel was damp somewhere, but it sure didn't look like that. We called an ambulance, but he woke up after a minute or 2 of saying how badly it stinks, and he felt like someone was whispering to him. That's why he was turning around for some time. He said he heard us talking to him, but this whisper was something else entirely. It creeps me the hell out, still to this day. Was that his paranoia acting up? Was he imagining that due to brain and air pressure? The tunnel was blocked the day after the incident by the city workers. I don't remember anyone entering that basement and tunnel anytime soon. Years later, we used to get drunk in the castle. We still visited the basement from time to time. What is still weird to this day is how about 5 minutes in there, you can feel this sort of air creeping around your neck, but you can't feel wind blowing inside. It feels like when someone is slowly exhaling behind you. I know it sounds like my buddies were messing around, but then I would totally hear and feel the person being behind me doing that. Besides, other people felt that eerie feeling around their necks too. We got convinced by other people that it's just the wind and hand or body movements that cause that, and simply because of that basement. It's cold and it's dark, and it's only normal to get a little paranoid in a space like that. There was a time when I was 10. I walked up to my mother and told her that I feel more connected to Satan than I do God. Now I don't remember saying this at all because even at 10, I knew that Satan was and is the bad guy. I knew not to mess with them. At the time, my mother thought it was because of the paranormal movies I had been watching and had got it from them. She told me I wasn't allowed to watch these kind of movies anymore, and I got visibly upset. When I turned 14, I went to my mate's house. She wanted to watch a paranormal movie that had finally come out on DVD. When she put it on, I didn't look at the case before she played it. The movie was The Conjuring. I had heard lots of stuff about it, that it was the scariest movie out there at the time,
so I was a bit scared to watch it. As the movie was playing, we stopped it because I 100% thought I heard someone upstairs. I thought it was just her brother, so I brushed it off. Halfway through the movie, I looked at her and said, "Your brother is very noisy." She looked at me with a scared look and told me that we were the only ones home. We paused the movie and thought we should investigate. Yes, I know it's how people get killed in movies, but I was 14. We started walking up the stairs, and it sounded like there was someone running in her dad's study room. She was too scared to open it, so I did. As I opened the door, I saw a black figure run past the door. I ran down the stairs and out the door. This was the first time my demon had ever showed itself to me in any way. When I saw it, I felt a big dark feeling that if I didn't get out of the house, I was going to be hurt. I messaged my mum to come pick me up, and she didn't ask any questions. She just came and took me home. When I went to bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. I looked over at my door, and when I tell you I felt happy, I really felt happy. I saw my Pop. He had big beautiful white wings with a gorgeous white glaze around him. In that moment I felt that my Pop was and is my guardian angel in heaven. I felt that my demon was also there, but he was standing guard, so it couldn't get in. It felt like he had out a protective shield around my room. All of my stress and worries were gone for the night, and I got the best sleep I had ever gotten in so long. I woke up and I thought he had left completely. I got scared that my demon was coming to get me. But as soon as I felt scared and unsafe, he wrapped his wings around me and let me know he is there. This was in 2014, and it is now 2021 on the 12th of May at 1:12 a.m. And I sometimes still feel him when I have gotten myself into shit with a bad spirit or demon, which tends to happen a lot, not on my own accord. I hope everyone is having a good night, day, afternoon. Wishing all the love and respect you deserve. This incident was quite different from my encounter with a shadowy visitor. This encounter was also unique because I had a co-worker directly beside me who also confirmed everything I saw. My co-worker, I'll refer to as Luke from here out. Luke was an extremely intelligent former military man with a razor-sharp wit. Guy was downright hilarious, and I always enjoyed working with him. Like many other guys I've had the privilege of working with, Luke was a hard-working, honest man who took his commitment to his work and family seriously. We were doing something called a power move in an active coal mining section. To the non-mining folk out there, I will try to elaborate. Imagine that you are vacuuming your carpet. It is a large room and your power cable cannot reach all the way to the other side of the room, so you grab an extension cord to finish the carpet. When coal mining, almost all of our equipment is ran by high voltage. The machines have a heavy cable that powers it and connects to a large metal box called a load center or power center. A giant cable runs into the section called a high line to the load center, and then all the machines are plugged into the load center like a giant power strip. It supplies 12,470 volts to the section, and I don't even remember how many amps. Enough to blow softball-sized holes out of the unlucky soul who makes a giant mistake and touches something they shouldn't. After removing all the coal that the machines can reach with the supplied cable, we add a length of cable to the high line, move the load center further into the section, and then the machines can now reach fresh coal to mine. During a power move, more belt line is added to allow transport of the mined coal, and walls have to be built to control the ventilation within the mining section. Then the cycle repeats. This occurs in what is called a gate section, while the longwall section is a different cycle. I didn't intend for this to be a lesson in coal mining, but I digress. Luke and I were tapped to build the walls that control ventilation. It's a crappy way to spend the shift, but ventilation is crucial in a coal mine. We had the block in place, and now we were required to apply the sealant that is called mud. It is a dry powder that comes in bags that must be mixed with water to make a brown, thick liquid that can be spread over the surface of the block and fill in any gaps in the wall to make as close to an airtight seal as possible. It's messy, stinky, fibrous stuff that is dangerous to breathe, causes chemical burns to bare skin, ruins clothes, and has to be shoved and spread into every nook and cranny in a block wall that is fitted into uneven floor, walls and roof. The block was somewhere around 45 pounds a pop, and you had to use quite a bit of them. Area was 16 feet wide and about 10 feet high. It was a pain in the ass. Sorry for the long lead-in. Luke and I had humped all the block into place from the pallets, and it was mud time. Problem was that the beltman had our water supply cut off to extend the water lines. Our boss told us that we were not permitted to leave the mine until the wall was finished. Without proper ventilation, coal could not be mined. Coal pays our wage. Coal pays the bills. Problem is, no water, no mud, no wall. The beltman would not have the water ready until the relief shift had arrived. Different bosses, different orders. During the shift, I had noticed large pools of water had collected in the return entry. I told Luke that I knew where usable water was, and we could grab some buckets and collect water there to mix the mud. We needed water. Didn't have to be clean water. We were kneeling down collecting water from a large puddle when I saw a miner walking toward us. It was late in the shift, so I assumed it was the fire boss on his inspection. Luke saw him as well. I noticed his cap light was unusually dim. It happens. Most miners carry a backup cap light for this contingency, since batteries wear out over the lifetime of the cap light. I distinctly remember his reflective clothing we are all required to wear. He was walking towards us as we were looking down, filling our buckets with water. When I looked back up, he was completely gone. Vanished, completely. I half yelled to Luke, "Where did he go?" I recall him looking all around us, realizing that there is literally nowhere for him to escape to. Then looking back at me, he opened and closed his mouth a few times as if to offer an explanation, and realized there wasn't any. Gone. We finished the wall somewhat late that shift, and this experience became a talking point between us. After discussing several things we had seen, it became apparent to me that he had experienced the shadow entity I had, only not as closely, and I had met another person who I could confide in what I was seeing without being ridiculed. Some men worked entire underground careers without experiencing anything unbelievable. Others, like myself, Luke, and many others, saw things that shook men to the core. I've been dealing with him since I was a kid. My parents named him Herbert, as he used to do things around their house and make the lights flicker when my sister was an angry teenager. Then she left and I came into the picture, and I don't think he was happy about it. There was a lot of murder in my house, from the time I was 8 to when I was 12. My brother became schizophrenic out of nowhere, and the voices would tell him to stab our pets to death, smash their heads in, and even ours too, but he wouldn't touch us. It drove my parents so insane, they had to divorce. I didn't really hear much about Herbert as a kid because he left when I came, but I have a feeling everything that happened in my childhood created some kind of aura for me that attracted these things. Now I'm 19,
and have been dealing with him for months now. I call him Edward. The lights flicker in the rooms I'm in, but only when I'm there. Anything from car lights, the lights in my friends' houses, and the LED lights in my room. Everything is constantly flickering, but only when I'm present. I always try to just say there's faulty wiring, but how can it always be faulty wiring everywhere I go? October 11th, 2020. My ceiling fell on me while I was taking a shower, revealing the dark attic and all of the vermiculite that I inhaled. We finally got around to boarding it back up on February 8th, 2021. Within not even 3 hours, clear goop started dripping steadily from the boards. I thought of every possible way this could happen. Mold, fungus, sap, anything. We even had someone go up there and check and make sure there wasn't something crazy. Nothing. The goop comes from literally nowhere. It stopped on February 10th, 2021. Then my dog starts screaming. He won't come upstairs to my room. He stays downstairs all day sleeping rather than being up here with me. He won't let me carry him up the stairs. He freaks out. Not sure if it has anything to do with Edward, but in October and December of 2019, he broke his back twice while he was home alone, and none of us could figure out how the hell he managed to do that. He's fine now after the most expensive surgeries of my freaking life. Also, in October 2020, my car stereo went on the fritz. I came outside from work and they were popping and emitting static so loud. My co-workers came outside to see what the hell was going on. I've done everything I can, from taking it to a mechanic to unplugging all the breakers that power both the stereo and the speakers. They do it when my keys are in my hand, before they ever even reach the ignition. There is no power to my radio or my speakers, and to this day, they pop, crackle, and emit loud, annoying static that almost causes me to crash my car. I started waking up covered in bruises and scrapes, and I'm constantly having headaches and losing time. I'm not sure what's going on, or how to stop this from happening. It's driving me and my family absolutely insane. Edit. I am adopted. I don't share blood with the crazies in my family. I actually have no known mental illnesses, not even depression. So I am employed as a policeman, and I work the night shift in a tiny little town. The population here barely breaks 1,000. Needless to say, I know the town well enough to be able to tell when something is off. Near the center of town, there is an old school they used before they built the new elementary and high schools. The building is listed as a historical site, so the building can't be demolished, but due to asbestos, renovations would cost the town too much to be worth the work. This school sits within feet of the public library, and behind sits the town's fairground. It isn't an official fairground, but every year they have bull riding and shows for small children they put on in the summer. With all of those details out of the way, I will explain what happened. I noticed the back light to the library on, which isn't normal since it wasn't all night, and it doesn't have a motion light. So I parked on the north side of the old school grounds. I walked through the fence and had passed the school to get to the library. I would stop every few feet and listen because the gravel was so loud. When I stopped the second or third time, I thought I heard a squeal in the school, like a squeaking door. And at first I didn't think anything of it, since I figured I was hearing things. The town just replaced all of the windows on this building, so I thought I wouldn't hear the inside. When I investigated the light and found all the doors locked, I was walking back around to my car. As I walked by the school, I again heard a noise in the building, and stopped and listened, and shined my light, noticing a basement window was broken out. So when I walked up to the window, I looked down and in, and didn't see anything. I kept walking and heard the squeal again. It reminded me of those bathroom doors in schools that the hinges always squealed really loud and echoed. When I came around the corner, I saw two cats roughhousing in the dirt. They stopped to watch me, and then both of them turned and looked at a door I couldn't see myself because it was around another corner. One hissed and they both bolted away from the school, which put me on edge. I know this school is absolutely not in use, nor are there any plans to use this school anytime soon. Also, the local kids and homeless don't come here ever. It is a landmark the city as a whole really admires, and hasn't ever been an issue with breaking and entering for a long time. So when I came around the corner, I saw the door and walked up to it to see what the cats had run from. I looked for other animals, but that didn't make sense, because they looked up as if someone was standing in the window of the door. Not like they would if it were a raccoon or a dog that ran off without me seeing. When I looked in the window with my light, I could see a gigantic Raggedy Andy painted on the wall, and I assumed that this was the kindergarten section or something. And then I stepped back from the door, getting ready to leave, and I heard whistling. It wasn't really loud, but it was loud enough to make me stop. That little voice in the back of my head was talking now, and telling me I was just hearing things. But the dude who likes the dump of fear of the unknown told me to go back to the door. So I went back and listened again, and I know it was whistling, and not like the squeak of an animal or object from inside. It got louder when I came to the door again, and it had a tune, but I don't know how to describe it. So now, thinking someone is in the school, I went around and checked all the doors, including the second floor door that I had to climb the rusty metal stairs that were more like a death trap. When I couldn't find a way into the school, I checked it all over again, and when I left I couldn't figure out what it was. The whistling had stopped, and I even hung around outside for a few minutes without my light on, just watching, figuring if someone was inside, they would eventually need to use the light to get around or back out. But there was nothing after 20 or so minutes. So I got in my car, circled the block and parked down the way, with my lights off to watch for someone to come out at some point. But no one did, and there haven't been any lights inside. I know this story seems kind of boring compared to the others, but working nights gets you on edge. And for all the things I know I experienced before, this was in my top 5 bone-chilling moments while working. I wanted to debunk the noise and the cats, but I wouldn't even know where to start with it. I just can't explain what happened. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope to share more experiences in the future. Update. So tonight I finally mustered up the intestinal fortitude to go back. I tried to return around the same time that I went last time, and I didn't hear any whistling. But something that kind of spooked me was when I got close to the building, a bunch of dogs in the neighborhood started barking. I don't think it was related, but I don't have a way to debunk this either. It's not normal for all the neighborhood dogs to start barking at once, but I won't chalk it up to paranormal just yet. I checked all the doors again, and I even took a picture of the painted Raggedy Andy on the wall. The only other thing that was odd was when I was standing underneath the stairs looking in the window to take a picture of Andy on the wall, the metal stairs above my head were clanking slightly, like someone was walking on them. But before I could go investigate it, I got called away to go back and do some real work. If I ever get anything solid, I'll definitely post it. Thanks for listening to my story. It was kind of fun. My son was 2 years old when all this started. I was sitting in the living room on the couch, watching my son play with his ball, and it had rolled into the dining room. I looked at him and told him to go get it, and he started crying and saying no, that there was a man in the dining room that was going to get him. As you can imagine, I jumped off the couch and ran to the dining room. There was no one there, yet my son was crying, saying he was standing in the corner. I told him there was no man in the dining room. I grabbed his ball and we went back to the living room. I had forgotten all about that encounter until he was around 3 years old, and my twin sister and our friend was at my house. Our friend kept bugging my son, wanting to play hide and go seek. She told him she was going to hide in our basement so that he couldn't find her. All of a sudden, in a different voice than he usually talked in, he pointed to the basement door and told my friend if she goes downstairs, the girl down there will kill her. I was shocked, for one, because he had told her in a deep, growling voice instead of his sweet baby voice. So I asked him who he was talking about, and he told me her name was Sarah. Then he went on to explain that Sarah was dead. I asked, how had she died? He then told me that she had died in a car wreck at the age of 16. She had been with her parents and they hit a tree, and then the car had went through a house. I couldn't believe what he just told us. A couple of days later, we went to eat at a Mexican restaurant. We went to the restroom before we left the restaurant. My son told my twin sister not to go into the bathroom stall next to the one he was in because Sarah was using that bathroom. My friend jokingly said, well, how did Sarah get here? My son told her, she sat between me and you in the back seat on the way up here. I thought maybe he just has a good imagination at his age. So a couple of months later, he grabbed my hand and told me, Mummy, come here, your friend wants to say hi to you. I went into his bedroom, holding his hand, and I asked, where is he? My son points and says he is standing right there, Mummy. My son then tells me, Jamie says to tell you not to be sad anymore. I asked him where he had heard that name from. My son says, he's standing right there. That's what he told me to tell you. Jamie was my ex-boyfriend. We had dated in middle school, and then again in high school. In high school, he had been in a car wreck and had passed away. A couple of weeks later, we were going through old photo albums, and my son points to a picture and says, I know that man. I asked, how do you know him? My son said, he comes and talks to me. I then explained that the man couldn't talk to him because it was a picture of my father-in-law. He had passed away before me and his dad had gotten together. My son says, Mum, I do talk to him. He told me about taking Daddy for rides in his old Ford truck when Daddy was little. I asked my husband about it and he confirmed that his dad had an old Ford truck that they used to go riding in. Then me and my husband were sitting in the living room a couple of weeks later, and we hear our son laughing and talking to someone. We both get up and walk into his room. I asked, who are you laughing at? He turns to us and says, I'm playing with Mama. My husband's mother had passed away when our son was 2 years old. I asked him what she was saying to him. He then threw his hand up and said, Hey, his name. That was exactly what she used to do every time he walked in the room before she passed away. My husband had to be at work at 5 a.m. every morning, so I would always get up and make him breakfast and make his lunch to take to work with him. He leaves for work, and I'm sitting in the living room, and I see something in our bedroom. I get up to see what it is, and I see 2 girls standing in the mirror, brushing their hair. I'm thinking I'm just seeing things, then I rub my eyes, and nope, they are still standing there. After they notice that I'm looking at them, they disappear. I ask my son what they wanted, and he tells me that Sarah came for him and that she isn't leaving till she gets him. I was so scared after he told me that. The scary part is my son was a healthy kid for the longest time. Then, all of a sudden, he started having stomach problems. The doctors have done all kinds of tests and cannot find a reason for why he is sick. He is now 14 years old, and when he was 11, he started having seizures. Of course, doctors did tests and couldn't figure out what was causing him to have seizures. They told us that usually one side of the brain triggers a seizure, but both sides of his brain show activity for the seizures. That being said, we moved out of the home we had been living in, and he got better. So I don't know if it was the house causing the illness or whatever was in the house. Now we have moved back into the house we used to live in, and his stomach problems have come back. Me and my husband had split up for about 8 months. That's the reason we moved out of the house, then moved back in. Growing up, my family has been subject to the paranormal in many ways. Visual, audio, smell and touch. My father was a non-believer till the day he died. Always made a logical reason to the bump or bang. Our basement was a nice cool place to be, especially in the summer months, as it retained its cooler temperature. For as long as we can remember, a spirit remained down there and was receptive to company of the living. We used to play Monopoly at the dining room table, and we would hear the squeaky stairs, and then we would look at the door as the knob jiggled. Sometimes the door opened and sometimes it just jiggled, as if some days it had the energy and others not. When my mother would do laundry, she only went to the basement in the company of one of our 2 black Labradors, either Duke or Duchess. She hated going down there because she was the very religious one and just hated the feeling of someone behind her. I would go down there and sleep often, as my dad was too cheap to install the AC units, and it was much cooler. I never really felt scared, but I did know I was not alone. Often I would hear the light switch click on and off. I remember my bike was flipped upside down and had the little beads on the spokes that would tinker-tanker as the kid spun a tire slowly. One time, he must have gotten spooked because I got spooked. He spun the tire when I was down there watching TV. I got up and started to leave the basement, thinking, not today, and I felt him behind me as if escorting me out. I started to run and felt the adrenaline as if my friend was about to take me in a game of tag. My dad was an electrician and installed the metal switches with lights green and red, indicating current or no current flow. The switches controlled everything from each individual light to the TV. Imagine a circuit breaker, and that's how the electricity was controlled. You could hear these metallic clicks from 100 feet away. After we did some digging, we learned through the library that a kid, Stephen, hung himself as a teenager due to severe depression. This was not too often, but not uncommon for patients to be untreated back in the day. It was sometime in 52 or 53 that this happened, if I remember correctly. My hair just stood up as I recall this next bit. In the laundry room directly behind the washer and dryer was our furnace. Above and just off to the side remained the pulley the young man attached to the joist. This is why my mother hated doing laundry. As soon as the dogs acted funny or raised their hairs on their backbone, she was out of there like a bat out of hell. The kid never did anything malicious, but he sure got satisfaction knowing that he got to you. As long as you could close your eyes, let the chills pass through you, as you kinda raised your head, as if you are holding it in,
It passed, and then you could continue to do what you were doing. I think he liked my mum the most, because she never stood her ground. And besides the one time I ran, I usually did. So my church is haunted, but there are areas that one might consider a hot spot. These areas are the first floor men's bathroom, the bridal room, which is beside the staircase mentioned in the first story, and the baptismal, which is connected to the third floor bathrooms. After years of being the custodian's son / part-time custodian, my friend has experienced pretty much all the notable spirits and ghosts that are in the church. One of these spirits is a little more than a mild inconvenience, due to the fact that it likes to throw a wet paper towel in an otherwise clean hallway. My friend had told me about this spirit's antics before the story I'm about to tell occurred. My friend and I were around 16 when this happened. My friend was playing basketball with 2 other friends from church one day during summer break. This was midday, so there was no one else at the church, and the church remained locked until we decided to go in. Being the custodian's son, my friend had a key. While taking a break from playing, all 3 of my friends swore that they saw the blinds in one of the windows on the 3rd floor move, like someone had brushed their hand from top to bottom. Me, not being a big basketball person, was not at the church to witness this part. Immediately after they saw the blinds move, they called me to tell me that they were going to go inside to investigate and to see if I was interested in joining. I arrived a few minutes later and we went in. Obviously, being an old building, the church has a tendency to make noises, but some of these are very distinguishable footsteps. One of my buddies puts his phone on the voice recorder and sits it in the first pew of the sanctuary, while we are wandering about the rest of the building, hoping to record some of the noises we keep hearing. We place the phone down and head to the 3rd floor. Nothing paranormal occurs on our first pass, but for some reason, we decide to take the same exact path that we had just taken over and over. In our second go-round is when we notice something strange. There is a broom propped up in the hallway of the men's bathroom on the 3rd floor. This broom was, without a doubt, not there on our first pass. We don't think much of this until our 3rd trek, when we notice that the broom is still in the doorway, but in a different position. The thing about it was that the broom had not slid out at the bottom, but had been stood up. We continue on this path maybe 3 or 4 more times. Maybe three or 4 more times. Each time the broom has moved to a different position in the same doorway. We decide that it has been long enough, so we go to check on the phone that my buddy had put in the sanctuary. We all go in and begin listening to the recording when we realize, because we couldn't tell what was us and what wasn't. That is until we hear a loud tap that sounded like it was coming from a few pews behind the phone. The tapping gets closer, then one more tap even closer. Finally, there was what sounded exactly like a triple tap on the screen of the phone. After listening to the recording, we decide to check on the broom one more time. As we reach the 3rd floor, there are 2 very obvious things that have changed. 1, the broom is now in a different doorway. And 2, there is a wet paper towel lying in the middle of the hallway, in front of the men's restroom. My friend claims to have seen a reflection that wasn't ours in the window across the hall from us, and that's when we decided that we were done ghost hunting for the day. A couple of years later, and one of my buddies is helping his dad, who is a plumber, renovate one of the bathrooms in the church. As they are headed to the bathroom, my buddy spots a familiar sight. In the middle of the hallway, lays a wet paper towel. So this is a story I have not told a lot of people in my life, but it's something that I will never forget. When I was about 13 years old, I lived in a house that was over about 100 years old at the time, and we always knew that there was some type of spiritual activity in the house. My brother claimed to hear a child crying in the basement, and my sister said that there was an old lady in a rocking chair next to her bed that she saw late at night. The old lady wasn't hostile or anything, probably just the spirit of the old lady that passed away in the house a few years back, before we moved in, according to what we researched on the house. About a year before this incident happened, my sister and her friends were messing around with a Ouija board, and safe to say, some crazy things happened that night that I'd rather not talk about. So fast forward about a year to, like I said, about 13 years old. Something that was the beginning of a month-long nightmare for myself. I can never explain the situation at all, but here it goes. So I was laying in my bed. It was early evening, so it was still outside, and I was just listening to my radio. I was not dozing off, I was wide awake, and I'm just listening to music and enjoying myself, enjoying the quiet in my own room. And all of a sudden something grabbed my ankle and started to pull me towards the foot of the bed. I yanked my foot away and whatever it was released its grip on me. I froze for a few seconds, trying to comprehend what just happened. And then I went to the foot of my bed and looked under the sheets, looked under the bed, looked everywhere to make sure that my little brother wasn't trying to pull a prank on me or something. There was nothing there. So I brushed it off, as maybe it was my imagination or something. You know, I don't know. So within 2 to 3 days after the incident, I started getting the strange dreams of a face. Not the whole face, just the eyes. And its eyes were closed. And I couldn't tell what it was, but I'd wake up sweating, and I wasn't sure why. Then, a few days after that, the eyes opened, and they were red and yellow, evil-looking eyes, and I would wake up shaking and sweating even more than before. A few days after that, the dreams escalated. I eventually got a full look at the face of what had been staring at me for the past week, and it was utterly terrifying. The skin on this thing's face was dark blood red and veiny, and the eyes were yellow laced with red in the irises. It just stared at me, and I can't even tell you how long it was staring at me for. Then I would wake up screaming because of this. A few days after that, the face started smiling at me. I can't even describe the amount of pure terror that I felt. It was just staring and smiling at me with sharp white teeth. A few days after that started, then I would picture it on what looked like an operating table, or maybe an emergency room bed. It would just sit up and everything was able to be seen. This entity had long tall spikes coming out of its head, and its entire body was that red veiny look, the same from its face, and it would just look at me. I barely slept for the better part of that month. Eventually my imagination took over with a hospital show that I watched on a regular basis, and then my dreams would incorporate that show with this entity, and eventually it faded off and I was able to sleep. But I could never explain this entire chain of events. I don't know if it was stalking me, like trying to possess me, and it failed. I remember clearly, after the incident with my sister and her friends playing with the Ouija board, that my grandma came in and blessed the house with holy water. Maybe it couldn't get that far with me, and it just decided to torment me. Maybe my brain protected itself, and then it was able to go elsewhere. I could never explain this, and to this day, I truly believe that there was some evil entity in that house.
and I have not been back there since we moved when I was 14 years old. Now that it's like 15 years later, I would love to one day go investigate this house, because I believe that house is a hub for spiritual energy, and then there's a demonic energy in there as well. I'm not sure why, how, or for what reason that was in that house, because everything else in there didn't seem to be hostile. And that's my story. I ran into a former co-worker at a local store today, and it jogged my memory of an encounter a co-worker had in the mine. I will refer to my co-worker as Jake from here out. I spoke with Jake about his encounter a day or two after it had happened, and he was definitely spooked by what he had seen. It was very unlike Jake to be flustered by anything, really, as the man is built like a tank. You all know the type. Athletic, weightlifter, good with the ladies and irritatingly good at anything they attempt. In a coal mine, inspections take place several times a day in operating sections, as well as areas that have been dormant for a long time. These guys are known as a fire boss. Firebossing is serious business, as the lives of many men rest on them doing their job correctly. Mostly, they are checking for roof falls, rib rolls, hot rollers on the belt line, correct and adequate airflow, and the scourge of all coal miners, methane. It was during a fireboss run that Jake had this encounter. I was on my run signing the date boards and had to pass through a regulator, an airlock. I opened the first door of the dog box, got in and closed the door. As soon as I closed the door, I heard the latch of the other door behind me get thrown, really hard. I felt the air pressure change as the other door was opened. I turned around surprised since I wasn't expecting anyone else way up in here, and it was looking at me. I asked what was looking at you. I don't know what it was. It was completely hairless, like no hair or eyebrows or facial hair. It was a white or greyish colour, and I didn't see any colour in its eyes. It had this awful look on its face, like it was going to rip me up and enjoy itself doing it. I threw the other door open against the air pressure and ran. I'll tell you, just as I already told Donnie, our mine foreman, that I ain't ever going back up there. They can fire me first. I felt bad for Jake. He got in some trouble because he flat refused to finish the fireboss run that day. Another man had to make his way in and do it before the mine could be cleared for the next shift. Rumor is the man who finished the fireboss run took a gun with him. It is a federal crime to take a gun underground, but if whatever it was had scared Big Jake, I can hardly fault the man. I've been dealing with him since I was a kid. My parents named him Herbert, as he used to do things around their house and make the lights flicker when my sister was an angry teenager. Then she left and I came into the picture, and I don't think he was happy about it. There was a lot of murder in my house, from the time I was 8 to when I was 12. My brother became schizophrenic out of nowhere, and the voices would tell him to stab our pets to death, smash their heads in, and even ours too, but he wouldn't touch us. It drove my parents so insane, they had to divorce. I didn't really hear much about Herbert as a kid because he left when I came, but I have a feeling everything that happened in my childhood created some kind of aura for me that attracted these things. Now I'm 19 and have been dealing with him for months now. I call him Edward. The lights flicker in the rooms I'm in, but only when I'm there. Anything from car lights, the lights in my friends' houses, and the LED lights in my room. Everything is constantly flickering, but only when I am present. I always try to just say there's faulty wiring, but how can it always be faulty wiring everywhere I go? October 11th, 2020. My ceiling fell on me while I was taking a shower, revealing the dark attic and all of the vermiculite that I inhaled. We finally got around to boarding it back up on February 8th, 2021. Within not even 3 hours, clear goop started dripping steadily from the boards. I thought of every possible way this could happen. Mold, fungus, sap, anything. We even had someone go up there and check and make sure there wasn't something crazy. Nothing. The goop comes from literally nowhere. It stopped on February 10th, 2021. Then my dog starts screaming. He won't come upstairs to my room. He stays downstairs all day sleeping rather than being up here with me. He won't let me carry him up the stairs. He freaks out. Not sure if it has anything to do with Edward, but in October and December of 2019, he broke his back twice while he was home alone, and none of us could figure out how the hell he managed to do that. He's fine now after the most expensive surgeries of my freaking life. Also, in October 2020, my car stereo went on the fritz. I came outside from work and they were popping and emitting static so loud. My co-workers came outside to see what the hell was going on. I've done everything I can, from taking it to a mechanic to unplugging all the breakers that power both the stereo and the speakers. They do it when my keys are in my hand, before they ever even reach the ignition. There is no power to my radio or my speakers, and to this day, they pop, crackle, and emit loud, annoying static that almost causes me to crash my car. I started waking up covered in bruises and scrapes, and I'm constantly having headaches and losing time. I'm not sure what's going on, or how to stop this from happening. It's driving me and my family absolutely insane. Edit. I am adopted. I don't share blood with the crazies in my family. I actually have no known mental illnesses, not even depression.
So not too long ago, me and my friends, being 16 to 19, discovered an abandoned building extremely close to our local high school. It is only separated by a highly trafficked nature center, with trails from the high school end of it to the abandoned facility. So being in a science class years prior, where we navigated these trails every day, I was surprised to have never found it. After telling me about it at lunch, me and about 3 friends decided to go after school to the building, and I was surprised that it was in a huge property that held about 8 football fields worth of random church-type buildings that were separated by about 50 yards each, and were pretty massive individually. The first one we navigated was in the way back. It was the most run down and also one of the largest. A back door was simply propped open with a brick, and once you entered, you were exposed to a very long, narrow, dark hallway with many doors opening up to it, and the smell of moldy drywall and dust. The wallpaper was creepily peeling off just about everywhere, and walking down the hallway, we noticed that some rooms were in a relatively 9 out of 10 condition, while others, the drywall between them had completely rotted away to leave a pile on the floor of disgusting brown and green rotting material, with the ceiling caving in. After we explored the entire building, we realized that it was completely symmetrical in some sense, and eerily, each room was labeled things like bedroom, dining hall,
etc. We found rooms that seemed to used to have padding and heavy doors that we recognized to be little cell-type rooms for angry mental people, like calm-down rooms. After realizing this and reading an old note we found in the boiler room, we realized that this was an old mental facility. The boiler room had stairs leading down to a completely flooded basement, which was very creepy looking. We found a room that my friends had set up previously with about 8 chairs set up in a circle, and we came back a few days later with literally 8 people, and it was pretty lit. Big midday and feeling safe, until one of us had the idea to start scaring each other and separating from the group. Everyone kept doing this for about 20 minutes, sneaking away with a buddy or two to slam doors and jump scare the rest of the lot. However, we started to notice that we weren't alone. There was someone or something else in the building with us. Me and my friend Twig were off to sneak from the rest and scare them as usual, when we noticed feet from the other side of the door. We also saw the door rattle, like it had been kicked or punched, and saw the footsteps walk away from under it. Scared shitless, we ran back to the rest of the group, still in the chair room, and told them, but they didn't believe us, as everyone kept saying that they saw something, and we assumed it was bullshit, since everyone was trying to scare each other. Eventually, someone had the grand old idea for us to all congregate in this chair room and be completely silent and listen for noises. To our surprise, we all heard sounds from the other side of the building, echoing towards us. Furthermore, me and a friend, about 10 minutes prior, both threw chairs down the hall to make noise to scare everyone. When we looked back down the hall seconds later, we noticed that both the chairs went very far down the hall, about 30 feet. With all of this, we all dipped very quickly into our cars, left and never came back until about a week later, when we found all of the windows had been smashed, not by us, and the doors that were open were all boarded up and locked up. We think that the city is keeping these buildings locked up for a reason, or if they don't know, something is lurking in the moldy, despairing darkness. Good thing they did. So my friend was living in this apartment building. His bathroom was in the basement, and opposite the bathroom there was a room that always seemed locked. One day, I was using his bathroom, and when I was done I noticed that the room across the hall has its door slightly opened, which I thought was odd. I told my friend that the door was open, and he rushed down to shut it and lock it, and we didn't speak more of this at the time. About a week later, I was again using his bathroom. On the way in, I double-checked the door across the room. It was shut, so I just did what you usually do in bathrooms. And when I got out, I saw the door was open again. This time my friend came down and we both stared at the door. I asked him if we could look inside. He was nervous, but said, "It's creepy in there. It's where my mum's doll collection is." Sure enough, she had a wall-to-wall porcelain doll collection. Just thinking of it today, many years later, it creeps me out. I kinda knew that entering that room was possibly the stupidest idea I ever had. And oh boy, I was right. We locked the door back up and went back upstairs to play some PS3. Nothing really happened that night. A few weeks later, we had a late night at his place, and I was once again using the bathroom. I was standing with my back to the door, and I heard the door to the doll room open up slowly, and I just ignored it. Suddenly, I hear dog nails scratch up against my door. Us dog people know this sound from anywhere. This spooked me a lot, even to this day. I gathered everything holy in me
and swung the door open, only to find nothing. My friend left the key in the door, so I locked it back up and told my friend. My friend told me that the house had some weird history. There was a reason that they had no animals in the house, and the few animals they ever had didn't survive long. I can't tell the reason, but it's obscure and very disturbed. This is where it gets a little too much, and to this day still haunts me every now and again. We were playing some PS3 again, and my bladder is not made for large quantities of Coca-Cola. So, bathroom I go. I didn't even notice the doll door, but I just stormed into the bathroom and did my thing. Suddenly, I hear dog nails walking on the concrete floor outside the door. So I wash my hands and swing open the door, and whatever that thing was, I'll never forget. It was a medium-sized dog with very messy fur and, when you take a picture of a dog, like reflective eyes, that was how the eyes looked. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. But it was only about 1 second, and it faded out of existence. I was done being alone in this basement. My friend didn't really believe, to be honest. I didn't really believe me either, but I got him convinced to try to catch this thing on video. But our shitty phone cameras were about 10 pixels of darkness, and that wouldn't work. So I did some research and found one of those ghost investigator teams with cameras and flashy things, and I told them about it. They were very hyped to spend a few hours in the basement/doll room. They got all their stuff set up and we sat 2 floors up playing some more PS3. After a little while we heard a lot of shouting and his front door slammed shut. So we went down there to see what the heck happened. All their things, cameras and all their ghost busting equipment was still there. So we went outside and spoke with them. They said that they would come back for their stuff in the morning, and then we could talk. They were shook to their inner cores. I went home and my friend went to bed. I was down there at 9 a.m. the next morning, but by then they already got their stuff packed up and left. My friend told me that they caught the door opening and something launched at them and haunted them out of the basement. I asked if they had any evidence, or at least something to show. And no, all their footage, except the door opening, got corrupted. I was so sad, but I'll never forget their faces. By this stage, his parents divorced, and his mum moved out and took her doll collection with her. But the thing in the basement stayed there. It was more rare that something went bump in the night, but to this day, I still walk by his old house, and every 8 to 10 months, the house gets new owners or is vacant. I wonder why. Thanks for reading, and have a great day. This story is actually a conglomeration of 3 separate stories. Going to try to keep it short. The first story is about the parsonage that is beside the church. For those of you who may not know, a parsonage is a house close to the church that the pastor lives in. Anyway, at the time that this happened, we had a temporary pastor who had been living in the parsonage for a little over a year. The pastor had a son who was my age and told me and my friend this story. While living in the parsonage, he always had a bad feeling just from being in there. His bedroom was in the basement, where this story occurs. One day, our pastor goes to the basement to retrieve something from one of the storage areas. When he opened the door to the storage room, he was chased from the basement by a single crow. How the crow, if that is what it really was, got into the basement and then into a closed room is still a mystery to me. The second takes place in the ground floor bathroom. In this bathroom is a storage closet that has an unfinished floor that is just dirt. Pretty common in basements. This area is occasionally called the portal to hell by some of the kids my age, due to the uneasy feeling you get from being around it.
As I was washing my hands, the door to the closet was pulled open fast enough to make wind. Luckily, I was only washing my hands because I was out of that bathroom in a second flat. The third story takes place in the second floor bathroom. This bathroom butts up against the storage/maintenance room. During a gathering at the church, I went to an unoccupied area of the church to do my business, because I'm a gentleman. Anyway, as I was sitting there, I heard a loud scratching sound coming from the cinder block wall right behind my head. Trying to stay calm, I told myself something had tipped over in the maintenance room. And that's what made the noise. I finished up and decided to look into the closet. The door, which was normally locked, opened right up to reveal that there was nothing in the room that had tipped, nor was there anything that could have even produced that noise in the first place. These stories aren't that scary to read, but they were horrifying in the moment. It's been quite a while since I've made an installment concerning the old encounters and experiences myself and fellow co-workers were exposed to. I had honestly never planned to write them at all, really. Most of the people involved never even talked about the unexplained things they had seen or heard in that place, or were very reluctant to. Perhaps it has to do with the trust coal miners have to have with one another. While I was in, I know the possibility that a methane buildup, an explosion, is a very real thing. It has happened numerous times in the past. Yet, I trust the fire bosses have done their runs correctly to monitor the gas. I trust the rock dusting crew suppressing explosive coal dust. I trust the man running the multiple-ton piece of equipment I have to work in close proximity with doesn't inadvertently crush me between a rock and a hard place. I must trust my own skills when operating a roof bolter. If a man you are trusting your life with in a very dangerous location begins telling stories of shadow people walking around, phantom miners, disembodied lights, and a white humanoid figure I was informed was likely a crawler, how do you process that? How do you deal if you are someone seeing and experiencing it or them? This encounter is, by far, the one that was witnessed by the most people at once. The people who were involved consisted of mostly bosses and men higher up in the pecking order of the mine. The encounter occurred during a visit by bosses and coordinators of the mine, just before the start of a major operation called a Longwell Move. It involves dismantling $100 million in equipment from a completed longwall section, transporting said equipment to a fresh longwall panel a couple of years in the making, and putting it all back together. This is no small feat. This operation is all hands on deck, highly coordinated. Every labor-intensive operation with gobs of heavy equipment and people in motion. Coordinators and longwall bosses have been known to sleep, eat, essentially live at the portal until finished. To the encounter. It was Sunday afternoon. Countdown to kick off the midnight shift that was actually Monday morning. To the non-mining folks out there, a coal mine on a Sunday afternoon is essentially empty. Fire bosses do their runs. Some contractors may be doing some out-by work. But generally speaking, mining sections are empty of miners. A man trip loaded with bosses and coordinators traveled about 45 minutes on rail from the elevator bottom to the longwall panel, about to be loaded with millions in equipment used in the extraction of countless tons of that black rock. Upon arrival on section, the men take their gear to what will soon be the dinner hall to put down their lunch buckets, coats, tools, gear, etc. After putting down their gear, they begin to move about the section, talking shop concerning equipment locations, timetables, equipment operators to use. Normal pre-operation talk. One of the bosses sees a figure walk from a crosscut. He points out the figure to the present party. The figure strolls out of the crosscut wearing a dim headlamp across what will be an equipment location and into the long wall face, disappearing into the rock wall. The men are dumbfounded. They essentially run to the location, simultaneously calling dispatch on the radio, inquiring who else was up there, and the tracking information on all the parties present. Tracking station reports they are the only people there, and no dispatcher has sent anyone into the section in many hours. The present crew scoured the section, looking for the figure most of them saw. After looking around, one of the bosses radioed the others to return to the dinner hall. All of the contents of the lunch pails, tools, jackets were upended and thrown about the location. It was like a 10-year-old on a temper tantrum was allowed to unleash his fury. The men, probably unnerved as they were, cleaned up and continued the task at hand. The long wall move started on time and completed pretty close to on schedule. The few that would talk about it afterward were definitely shaken. Their radio chatter from that night were of scared men trying to stay calm and do their job. And they did. Our new house was under construction, so my mum had to supervise it. I had to go home alone and have snacks. It was the routine that I left the school and headed to the construction site to pick up the keys of the old house from my mum. I took the keys and went to the old house. I heard moaning sounds while going inside, but I didn't care much about it. I grabbed some snacks and sat in front of the TV and started watching Oggy and the Cockroaches. I felt like someone was observing me. I heard low, moaning sounds. All of a sudden, the half-filled water bottle on the table started levitating, almost like a flying butterfly. Without further thinking, I freaked out and ran faster than Bolt to the outside of the house, as I already felt someone's presence in the house. I gathered all my courage to investigate and headed inside the house. And then I saw a black translucent figure standing right at the levitated bottle. There were no rumors about the rented house, but I freaked out and left the house unlocked and ran to the construction site. I told my mum about the incident, but she didn't believe me. And from that day on, I always had nightmares about that old house. I was 10 at the time. That's my one and only ghostly experience. Thank you. I was at a party with my high school crew, and we had a few bottles and a few grams on us. We heard that some football team from Des Moines was coming through, and we weren't sure if they'd be cool or not, since athletes in our town were usually douchebags. If they turned out to be douches, we wouldn't want to share any of our bud with them. So we decided to hide it until we got to know them, so they wouldn't come up to us and ask to join the smoke session. To avoid this, I brought the bag downstairs to the basement because I assumed nobody would be going down there. There wasn't any space to party, just a bunch of haphazardly stored boxes and totes. I found a basket on a table and put the baggie in it, then placed a blanket on top. Nobody would find it if they didn't know what they were looking for, so I called it good and rejoined the party. Later on, we'd started drinking a little, and the players showed up, and turned out to be pretty cool. I'd forgotten about the weed until I saw one of them, a big-ass, broad-shouldered dude in his team jersey, being led down the stairs by a slender girl with long hair. I saw her lead him down the stairs and figured I knew what they were up to, wink wink. But I didn't want them stumbling upon the bag and claiming finders keepers, so I followed them down the stairs. I knew I'd look like a weirdo following them like that, since no one else was down there, but I didn't want them taking our shit, so I followed about 2 to 3 steps behind them. I saw the girl enter the basement, and then out of my view, and then the guy, and then I stepped in right behind them. When I got down there, mind you, this was barely a second or two after they left my sight, all I saw was the football player, looking around frantically, looking confused as hell, I said, "What's up, dude?" Trying to figure out how I'd explain my reasons for following them down into the basement. But he just turned to me and said,
Where'd she go?
I said, you mean that girl? What you mean? I saw her come down with you. He said something along the lines of,
Yeah, man. She just came up to me out of nowhere and whispered, "Follow me." But now she's gone, bro. She just disappeared.
I figured she was hiding in the closet or something, so I looked around. He was too shook to go into the closet, and she was nowhere to be found. There's no door down there, and when we ran upstairs to tell the host, she just laughed and said, "Yeah, this house is haunted as hell," and walked away, completely nonchalant about the whole thing. Never got a better explanation out of her. She wasn't someone I knew very well, just a friend of friends of friends. All I knew is that there was no door and no time for this girl to have come up with any sufficiently clever way to disappear from view. We carried on with the party, and nothing else seemed to be out of place that night. Still, I can't help but wonder, what would have happened to that guy if I hadn't followed him into the basement? This one actually happened when there were people in the sanctuary during an Easter drama that my church puts on every year. It started with a short wait in the sanctuary because it is a guided walkthrough from garden to tomb, showing the last days of Jesus, ending with the resurrection. While there was a decent group waiting in the sanctuary, one of the glass plates that held a candle in the windowsill was violently flung into the middle of the sanctuary. The candle that it was holding remained in the windowsill. Although it was witnessed by several people, there are still those who chose to believe that things like that just happen sometimes. Yesterday, I froze my ass off. My home was without power for around 7 hours yesterday, and with the piles of snow hanging around here in West Virginia, the temperature in my home was far from comfortable. While hanging out and reading my book, my mind began to wander back to some of those strange experiences I had while working in the mine. I think Nicole helped to bring back the memory because that shift, among many others, was frigid. A common misconception people have is that the mine remains a constant temperature. This is not true. Admittedly, during the summer months the mine is somewhat cooler, as we're underground and not subjected to the direct solar radiation that serves to make the hot days hot. This does not mean that men are comfortable during the summer months. The thing most people fail to realize is that coal mines are pumped full of air year-round. Air measured in several thousand cubic feet per minute is required by law to course through that mine to provide ventilation. That means during the hottest summer months, hot and humid air is being forced underground into the workspace. The humidity gets so bad, sometimes condensation drips from everything. Add hot equipment, and I have literally witnessed men wring sweat from shirts. Conversely, this airflow tends to make the mine a very cold and bleak place during the winter months. Men working day shift arrive to the mine and cage down when the sun is mostly still below the horizon. They then work their shift in complete darkness and cage up when the sun has mostly set. The result is a man on day shift not getting to see the sun for a week or more. A man on midnight shift spends his work during the coldest hours of the day, pummeled by frigid air. When a miner doing heavy work sweats on any shift, that frigid air chills to the bone. Imagine your clothes being wet in December, then riding in the bed of a truck. I don't recall what shift I was working during this encounter. I do recall that my area was experiencing what was called a polar vortex. It didn't matter how many layers you wore, it was just so cold.
I was working with a guy I'd been paired up with several times in the past. We had the same job bid, so it was not unusual for us to work together, since we had the same job classification. We were working for a bit, then ducking into an area out of the direct airflow to try and stay warm. Several times while we were working together, I observed him stopping what he was doing and looking up at the mine entry. I ignored this for some time, as my only concerns at the moment went something like, holy shit cold, holy shit cold, holy shit cold, holy shit cold, holy shit cold. Eventually I had enough of him staring off up the entry, and asked him what the hell was the problem. He said,
Have you noticed the light?
I replied that I had not. We stepped out of the direct airflow, and he told me that for the last hour or so he had seen a dim light moving back and forth up the entry. This was before my encounters with that, whatever it was, later in my career. I told him that it was likely our own cap lights he was seeing, and no one else was up here. We had to take a man trip and then walk quite a while just to get to our work area, and were far enough in that working alone was greatly discouraged. He then looked at me and said something that greatly disarmed me. He said,
I'm sure.
We made a couple of seats on the mine floor, sat down and shut off our cap lights. For a minute or so, my brain tried to fill in the blackness and sensory deprivation from the complete lack of sight. Following that, my brain seemed to be okay that I was sitting in the pitch black. We sat in this way for probably 10 to 20 minutes. Time was hard to judge then. We sat completely silent when I began to see a dim light from a crosscut up the entry. The light got brighter until I could see a single point of dim light about the height of a man bobbing slowly along, like the gait of a person walking casually. It crossed the entry and disappeared into the crosscut on the other side. I never saw anything but the dim light bobbing along as if someone was slowly strolling about. At first I wondered if it was my mind just filling in the sensory deprivation. However, at the moment the light broke the crosscut and into the entryway, I heard my co-worker's intake of breath as he was processing what he was seeing. The light nearly faded from view as it entered the opposite crosscut, but staying a dim glow. The light began to grow brighter again as it emerged in the entry to cross back to where it started. The light was a little dimmer on the return trip, but there was no mistaking it was there. We sat this way for another 30 or so minutes. Again, time was very hard to judge. The light seemed to mill around on the left side of the entry in the crosscut out of the direct line of sight until the area returned to pitch dark again. I struggled to estimate the amount of time light could be observed. After we got enough courage to speak to one another, we compared stories to be sure we observed the same thing. After our shift ended, 2 guys on the next shift were to travel up to where we were to continue roof bolting. If it wasn't done, to the next shift until completion. The job was completed before we had to return to the area the next day. Another short one, not super spooky. My friend David and I were at the church moving some boxes from the storage room on the 3rd floor for his mum. We were the only ones there at the time. About halfway through moving the boxes, we go outside to sit down for a few minutes. Once we were ready to get back to work, we head back to the doors. These were old wooden doors with manual locks, only to find that they are now locked. At this point, we have had more experiences at this church than what I would assume most people will have in a lifetime. So we take the hint and decide to call it a day. My friend David and I were at his graduation party, and we were telling one of his other friends about some of the strange things that go on at our church. David's friend didn't really believe the stories. So we decided to take him to the church that night, when we knew no one else would be there. We get to the church around 9 p.m, unlock the doors and go in. All the lights are off, so we are going room to room, turning them on as we go. Almost immediately, we all hear footsteps on the floor above us. We finish going through the first floor, and as we are ascending the stairs, we hear the footsteps come to the top of the stairs, which is around a landing halfway up the staircase. In the window on the landing, we can clearly see an outline of what looks like a person. At this point, our friend had decided that he had gotten enough proof to believe our stories and was ready to leave. We are standing there in the parking lot, facing the door, arguing over who's going to have to go back inside and turn all the lights off, when all of a sudden, there are 3 very distinct taps on the nursery window. The nursery is on the 2nd floor, and on the side of the building we were facing. That made the decision about turning the lights out a bit harder. Fun facts about the nursery. Once we got back to David's house, we were telling his mum, the actual custodian of the church, about what had happened, and she told us that she hated having to go into the nursery while she was alone, due to the feeling she got going in there. She also said that the old wooden rocking chair that was there would almost always be rocking when she went in to clean, so she would go clean something else and wait for whoever it was in the rocking chair to finish up. So it's been a while since I posted a story from my church. While talking to my friend about an experience we had, I realized that I have seen an embodiment of one of the spirits from our church, something I had previously thought I hadn't experienced. I was very young when I saw it, so I never put it together until we were talking about something he had seen. He was talking about the time we had been lured into the church by a dark figure in the window, which proceeded to lead us on a wild goose chase through the church. He described the figure he had seen as an average-sized male with no features, just all black. After hearing this, I remembered a time where I was waiting on my parents, who were talking to some people after evening service. Most everyone had gone home at this point, and the lights were turned off on all the floors, except the ground floor. Being the adventurous little kid I was, and not really believing in ghosts, I decided to go to the 3rd floor with all the lights off. As I rounded the steps to the 3rd floor, I saw the silhouette of an all-black man, thanks to the light in the parking lot coming in through the window. I immediately ran back to my parents and told them, but as any good Baptist parents would, they told me that it was just someone from the church. This occurred in the same spot that my friend had seen the figure.